Welcome, dear listener, to another historical journey designed to help you drift into peaceful slumber. I'm so glad you've joined me tonight as we travel back through the mists of time to explore the brutal reality of life as a medieval merchant's wife. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Congratulations, you've just woken up in the late 15th century. The first rays of sunlight filter through the small window coverings of Eleanor's chamber, illuminating dust motes that dance in the golden beams. Like most merchant families of means, Eleanor and her husband Thomas live in a multi-story townhouse situated along one of the main streets of the town. Their home, while not as grand as the local lord's manor or as humble as a peasant's cottage, represents the growing prosperity of the urban merchant class. The house itself tells a story of medieval ingenuity and practicality. The ground floor, constructed of stone to prevent fire and deter thieves, serves as Thomas's shop and warehouse where he sells imported spices, silks, and other luxury goods from distant lands. The upper floors, built of timber frame with wattle and daub filling, contain the family's living quarters. The jutting upper stories extend over the street below, maximizing living space while creating sheltered walkways for pedestrians, a common feature of medieval urban architecture that you might still glimpse in preserved historical towns today. As Eleanor stirs beneath her woolen blankets, she doesn't wake to the sound of an alarm clock, but rather to the gentle tolling of the church bells marking the hour of prime, around 6 in the morning. Medieval people divided their day according to the canonical hours, religious intervals marked by church bells that structured daily life across Europe. These sounds, so foreign to our modern ears accustomed to digital beeps and smartphone chimes, provided the rhythmic backdrop to all medieval existence. Take a moment to imagine those bells, their deep resonant tones echoing across the town, calling faithful to prayer while simultaneously announcing the start of the working day. Unlike our modern lives, dictated by exact minutes and seconds, Eleanor's day flows according to these approximate divisions of time, marked by bells, shadows, and the position of the sun. Eleanor doesn't linger in bed, despite the chill of the morning air. The feather mattress she shares with Thomas sits atop a rope frame, which requires regular tightening, hence the origin of the phrase, sleep tight. Without central heating, the room quickly cooled overnight, and the embers in the bedroom's small brazier have long since died down. This constant battle against the cold is something all medieval people contended with, regardless of their station in life. As she rises, Eleanor's feet meet the rush matting covering the wooden floor. Fresh rushes, sometimes mixed with fragrant herbs like lavender or rosemary, would be strewn across floors to provide both insulation and pleasant scents. In wealthier homes like Eleanor's, these might be woven into proper mats, while poorer households would simply scatter loose rushes. The gentle crunch underfoot and subtle release of herbal fragrances as she walks across the room would be part of the sensory tapestry of her morning routine. Can you feel the cool morning air against your skin? The slight roughness of the rush matting beneath your feet? The weight of the woolen gown as Eleanor pulls it over her linen shift? These tactile experiences of daily life, so different from our modern world of synthetic fabrics and climate-controlled environments, grounded medieval people in their physical reality in ways we might find both challenging and refreshingly immediate. Eleanor's first task is to dress, a process quite different from our modern routine. She begins with her linen shift, a simple, loose-fitting undergarment that protects her outer clothing from body oils and perspiration. Over this, she dons a woolen kirtle, a fitted gown that serves as her main garment. As a merchant's wife of some status, Eleanor's kirtle might be dyed a rich color, perhaps a deep blue from valuable woad or indigo if Thomas trades in dye stuffs. The process of dyeing fabric in the medieval period was complex and often malodorous, involving substances like stale urine as fixing agents. The vibrant colors we associate with medieval illuminations and tapestries were the product of sophisticated knowledge of natural materials and chemical processes. For a typical day overseeing household matters and perhaps helping in the shop, Eleanor covers her hair with a linen veil secured by a circlet or fillet. Unmarried women might display their hair, but a respectable married woman like Eleanor keeps hers covered in public. The visual cues of clothing and headwear immediately signaled one's marital status, gender, and approximate social position to others in medieval society, a time when identity was far more externally and collectively defined than in our individualistic modern era. Now, let's follow Eleanor as she begins her morning duties and household management. Eleanor's responsibilities as the mistress of a merchant household are vast and demanding. While her husband Thomas focuses on trade, negotiations, and business travel, Eleanor essentially functions as the chief operating officer of both household and family business. This division of labor, while still operating within the patriarchal framework of medieval society, afforded merchant wives considerable authority and agency within their domain. As Eleanor descends the narrow wooden staircase from the sleeping quarters, the house is already stirring with activity. In a prosperous merchant home like hers, several servants help manage the substantial workload. Unlike aristocratic households with highly specialized servants, Eleanor's household staff would be more limited. Perhaps a cook, a maidservant, and an apprentice or two learning the merchant trade from Thomas. The first order of business is overseeing the preparation of the morning meal. The medieval day typically included two main meals, a lighter breakfast and a more substantial dinner around midday, with perhaps a light supper in the evening. The kitchen, often located in a separate structure behind the main house to reduce fire risk, is already alive with activity as the cook prepares a simple breakfast of bread, perhaps some cheese, and small beer. A low-alcohol beverage, often safer to drink than water in medieval towns with questionable sanitation. The delicious aroma of freshly baked bread fills the air. In many towns, baking was regulated, with commercial bakers producing most bread, but a merchant household like Eleanor's might have its own small baking facilities. The hearty, dense loaves would bear little resemblance to our modern, fluffy white bread. Made from maslin, a mixture of wheat and rye, or even barley or oat in poorer households, medieval bread required substantial chewing and provided significant nutrition and sustenance. After breaking her fast, Eleanor begins her rounds of household inspection. Medieval household management was far more hands-on than modern equivalents, requiring constant vigilance and an intimate knowledge of food preservation, textile production, and resource management. Without refrigeration or modern packaging, food storage presented particular challenges. Eleanor checks the pantry, where salted meats hang from hooks, and barrels contain preserved fish, grains, and legumes. The root cellar holds apples, turnips, and other produce that can last through winter months. The intricate dance of seasonal eating, consuming fresh foods when available and properly preserved foods during leaner months, required considerable planning and foresight. Eleanor would need to anticipate household needs months in advance, ensuring sufficient stores to last through winter and early spring before new crops became available, a challenging calculation that could mean the difference between comfort and hunger. In the storeroom, Eleanor inventories the household linens, noting which tablecloths, napkins, and bed sheets require washing, a labor-intensive process that might only occur every few weeks in winter, when drying posed additional challenges. Laundry in the medieval period was physically demanding work, involving soaking, treating with lye, a caustic substance made from wood ash, beating, rinsing, wringing, and then drying, all done by hand and often in cold water that chapped and reddened the skin. Feel your own hands for a moment. Imagine them reddened from lye soap and cold water, slightly rough from constant work. Medieval hands, particularly women's hands, told stories of labor that our modern moisturized fingers rarely express. As she continues her morning routine, Eleanor must also supervise the work of her servants, ensuring tasks are completed correctly and efficiently. The relationship between mistress and servants in a merchant household was often closer than in aristocratic settings, with everyone working in relatively close quarters. Eleanor likely knows intimate details of her servants' lives, and they of hers. privacy being a concept quite different in medieval times than in our modern understanding. For a merchant's wife, household management extends beyond the physical maintenance of the home to include account keeping, and often participation in the family business. Eleanor, like many merchant wives, is literate, though her reading would likely be primarily in the vernacular rather than Latin, which remained largely the domain of clerics and scholars. Her ability to read contracts, maintain household accounts, and perhaps correspond with trading partners makes her an invaluable partner in her husband's commercial enterprise. Now let's continue following Eleanor through her busy morning. The merchant's business and a wife's role. While Eleanor's morning has been consumed with household matters, her involvement in the family business is equally significant. As we follow her through the small door connecting the residential quarters to the shop below, we enter the commercial heart of this medieval household. The shop occupies the ground floor of the house, with large shutters that open onto the street, serving as both storefront and counter when folded down. Inside, shelves and chests display Thomas's merchandise, perhaps silk from Byzantine territories, pepper and cinnamon from Far Eastern trade routes, fine woolen cloth from Flanders, or wine from French vineyards. Each item represents not just a commodity, but a story of distant lands and the complex web of trade that connected medieval Europe to the wider world. The air in the shop carries a fascinating blend of scents: the slightly musty odor of wool bales, the sharp tang of spices, perhaps the sweetness of preserved fruits or honey. For medieval customers, a merchant's shop offered a sensory journey to distant lands they would likely never visit themselves. The exotic nature of imported goods created an almost magical quality around them, with certain spices valued not just for their flavor but for their reputed medicinal or even mystical properties. As a merchant's wife, Eleanor possesses intimate knowledge of the business inventory, suppliers, and regular customers. When Thomas travels to trade fairs or distant markets, journeys that might take him away for weeks or even months, it typically falls to Eleanor to manage the shop in his absence. This commercial responsibility required merchant wives to develop considerable business acumen, negotiation skills, and knowledge of weights, measures, and currencies, making them among the most commercially educated women of their time. Medieval commerce operated on credit to a surprising degree, with complex networks of debt and obligation connecting traders across Europe. Without modern banking systems, these personal relationships and reputation networks formed the backbone of commercial trust. Eleanor maintains the ledger recording who owes money to the business and what the business owes to others, a delicate balance that required diplomatic skill to manage, especially when calling in debts from powerful customers who might take offense. Isn't it fascinating how the stereotypical image of the helpless medieval woman contrasts with the reality of merchant wives like Eleanor? Historical records from towns across Europe reveal women actively engaged in business, with some even taking over completely upon their husbands' deaths. Guild records, court documents, and wills all testify to these women's commercial capabilities and legal standing within the urban economy, a nuanced reality often overlooked in simplified historical narratives. Today, a wealthy customer, the wife of a minor nobleman, is expected to visit the shop to select silk for a new gown. Such patronage from the gentry represents both opportunity and challenge for merchant families like Eleanor's. The social distinction between merchants and nobility remains significant despite merchants' growing wealth and influence. Eleanor must strike a delicate balance, showing appropriate deference while also demonstrating the expertise that justifies her goods' premium prices. As the noblewoman arrives with her lady's maid, Eleanor assumes the role of knowledgeable saleswoman. She explains the provenance of different silks, this luminous blue from Byzantine territories, this delicate embroidered piece through Italian trade connections. She describes how each might be fashioned into garments, demonstrating the drape and suggesting complementary trims. Throughout this interaction, Eleanor navigates complex social waters. She is technically of lower status than her customer, yet possesses greater expertise regarding the merchandise. The gentle rustle of silk as Eleanor drapes it over her arm Demonstrating its luster in the light streaming through the shop's open shutters creates a moment of shared appreciation between women from different social spheres. Such commercial interactions provided rare opportunities for women of different classes to engage with one another outside strictly hierarchical social settings. After some deliberation, the noblewoman selects several yards of deep crimson silk and arranges for payment, not immediately in coins, but as an addition to her husband's account with the merchant household. This credit arrangement is typical of medieval commerce, where actual currency might change hands relatively infrequently compared to the recording of debts and obligations. Eleanor carefully records the transaction in the business ledger, her neat handwriting documenting both the sale and the extended credit. I wonder how many of you listening right now have ever thought about the complex role of medieval women in business. If you're finding these historical insights interesting, please tap the like button while you drift off. It helps more history lovers find our Sleep Journey community. Now, as midday approaches, let's follow Eleanor as she transitions from business matters back to household responsibilities, midday meal and domestic production. The tolling of the church bells announces the hour of sext, midday, signaling time for the main meal of the medieval day. Thomas returns from the guild hall where he's been discussing business with fellow merchants, and the household gathers for dinner, the most substantial meal in the medieval daily rhythm. Unlike our modern custom of late dinners, medieval people typically ate their largest meal around midday, when daylight permitted clear visibility of food, important in detecting spoilage before refrigeration, and provided energy for afternoon work. The practice of eating a lighter evening meal and a substantial midday dinner persisted in many European cultures into the modern era, and can still be observed in regions where the main meal is taken at lunch rather than in the evening. The dining area in Eleanor and Thomas's house occupies a portion of the hall, the main living space of the upper floor. A trestle table, which can be disassembled and moved aside when not in use, has been set with wooden trenchers, flat pieces of bread or wood serving as plates, pewter cups for the family, and wooden cups for servants. The spatial arrangement at the table reflects the household hierarchy, with Thomas at the head, Eleanor at his side, children and apprentices in descending order of age and status. As a prosperous merchant household, the dinner features more variety and better quality than most medieval people would enjoy. Today's meal includes a fish stew, it being Wednesday, one of the numerous fast days when medieval Christians abstained from meat, served with bread, seasonal vegetables from the kitchen garden, and perhaps a custard or fruit preserve for dessert. Such a meal represents significant prosperity in a time when most people subsisted primarily on grain-based foods, with meat as an occasional luxury. Imagine the aroma of that fish stew, seasoned with onions, garlic, and perhaps a pinch of expensive saffron if Thomas trades in such luxury spices. The broth, sopped up with chunks of hearty bread, provides both nourishment and warmth. The wooden spoons and knives, forks being still uncommon in most of Europe, connect diners physically to their food in ways our modern tableware doesn't quite replicate. The tactile experience of medieval dining, tearing bread, using fingers for many foods, drinking from shared cups, created a sensory intimacy with nourishment that our sanitary modern customs have largely eliminated. Mealtime serves not just for nourishment, but for family business discussions and domestic planning. Thomas shares news from the guild hall, perhaps political developments affecting trade, news of ships arrived in nearby ports, or gossip about fellow merchants. Eleanor updates him on household matters, the noble customer's substantial purchase, and any issues requiring his attention. The merchant household functions as a unified economic entity, with both spouses contributing essential skills and knowledge to its prosperity. After the meal, while Thomas returns to the shop or perhaps visits the town's counting house to arrange payments, Eleanor oversees what might be called the manufacturing aspect of the household. Beyond mere maintenance, medieval households like hers were productive centers engaging in small-scale industry, particularly textile work, food preservation, and medicinal preparation. In the solar, a private upper room with good light, Eleanor and her maidservant work at spinning wool into thread, a near-constant activity for medieval women across social classes. The gentle rhythm of the drop spindle or spinning wheel forms a meditative backdrop to women's daily lives. Even aristocratic women engaged in textile production, though they might focus on decorative embroidery rather than basic spinning and weaving. The soothing, repetitive motion of drawing out the wool fibers and twisting them into strong, even thread requires skill developed over years of practice. Eleanor likely began learning this essential craft as a young girl, her fingers gradually developing the muscle memory that now allows her to spin almost automatically while supervising other household activities or engaging in conversation. This textile work represents significant economic contribution to the household. The thread Eleanor spins will be woven into cloth, either within the household or by professional weavers, for family clothing, household linens, or potentially for sale. In an era before mass production, each garment represented substantial investment of time and resources, explaining why clothing was so frequently mentioned in wills and passed down through generations. Feel your own clothing against your skin as you rest, the gentle weight of your blanket, the texture of your sheets. Now imagine a world where each thread in those fabrics was spun by hand, each piece of cloth woven on a loom powered by human muscle alone. The medieval relationship to textiles, intimate, labor-intensive, and value-conscious, reminds us how relatively recent our age of abundance truly is. As Eleanor spins, she simultaneously supervises the preparation of medicinal remedies from the herbs grown in her kitchen garden. Most routine healthcare in medieval households fell under women's domain, with wives and mothers expected to treat common ailments, dress wounds, and prepare preventative tonics. A merchant's wife, like Eleanor, would possess a mental repository of herbal knowledge, understanding which plants might reduce fever, ease digestive complaints, or help heal minor injuries. Today, her maidservant is crushing dried mint and chamomile to create a digestive remedy for one of the apprentices suffering from stomach distress. The mortar and pestle work produces a gentle, rhythmic sound and releases fragrant essential oils into the air of the solar. This domestic medicine, based on generations of observed effects rather than scientific understanding, represents an intersection of practical experience and folklore that form the foundation of medieval healthcare for most people. If you're still awake and finding this journey into medieval domestic production interesting, I'd love if you'd subscribe to join our historical sleep journey community. Your support helps me continue creating these detailed historical narratives designed to both educate and soothe. And now, let's continue following Eleanor through the afternoon hours of her busy day. Afternoon business and social obligations. As the afternoon progresses, Eleanor must balance continued household and business responsibilities with the social obligations that come with her position as a merchant's wife. The tolling of the bells for none, around 3 in the afternoon, marks a transition in her daily rhythm. Having completed the spinning work and supervised the medicinal preparations, Eleanor now turns her attention to correspondence. Literacy rates in medieval Europe varied significantly across regions and social classes, but by the later medieval period, basic literacy had become essential for successful merchants. While Thomas handles most business correspondence, Eleanor maintains communication with family members in other towns and occasionally with trusted suppliers when Thomas is traveling. Writing materials in the medieval period were precious commodities. Eleanor sits at a small writing desk near the window to maximize natural light. She carefully trims a quill pen with a small knife, preparing it to create the neat controlled strokes that mark educated handwriting. The parchment, made from prepared animal skin, represents significant expense, so Eleanor composes her thoughts carefully before committing them to this valuable writing surface. For less formal notes or practice, she might use a wax tablet that could be smoothed and reused, the medieval equivalent of a dry erase board. The deliberate pace of medieval writing, the careful dipping of the quill in oak gall ink, the thoughtful formation of each letter, the need to periodically sprinkle sand to dry the ink, created a relationship with written communication quite unlike our rapid, disposable modern methods. Each letter represented significant investment of time and resources, giving written words a weight and significance we might find difficult to comprehend in our age of instantaneous, abundant communication. Today, Eleanor writes to her sister, who married a merchant in a neighboring town, sharing family news and inquiring about a potential trading opportunity Thomas is considering in her sister's region. Such family networks played crucial roles in medieval commerce, creating trusted connections in distant locations before modern business infrastructure existed. Isn't it interesting to consider how these family business networks operated as a kind of early franchise system? Historical records show merchant families frequently arranged marriages that expanded their commercial territories, with siblings, cousins, and in-laws, creating reliable trade connections across Europe. These personal relationships formed the foundation of international commerce long before corporate structures emerged. After completing her correspondence, Eleanor prepares for an important social obligation, a meeting of the parish guild to which she and Thomas belong. Medieval urban society was organized around various overlapping memberships and affiliations. While Thomas participates in the merchant guild governing his profession, both he and Eleanor belong to a religious fraternity associated with their parish church, dedicated to St. Nicholas, patron of travelers and merchants. These parish guilds served multiple functions in medieval urban life: religious devotion, social networking, charitable works, and mutual aid among members. Guild membership provided crucial safety nets in a world without government social services, offering support to members during illness, assistance to widows and orphans, and proper burial arrangements, all significant concerns in the precarious medieval world. Before leaving for the guild meeting, Eleanor changes into more formal attire, adding a fitted surcoat over her kirtle and exchanging her everyday head covering for one of finer linen with decorative embroidery around the edges. As a merchant's wife of some standing, her public appearance reflects not just personal taste but the family's commercial success and social position. The visual cues of dress immediately signal status and affiliation to others in the highly status-conscious medieval world. Eleanor walks through the town streets toward the parish church where the guild will meet. Medieval urban spaces would feel remarkably compact to modern sensibilities, with narrow streets, overhanging buildings creating tunnels of shade, and a dense mixture of residential, commercial, and manufacturing activities coexisting in close proximity. The sensory experience of these streets, the calls of vendors, the pungent mix of aromas from tanneries and food stalls, the squelch of mud or animal waste underfoot, created an immersive environment utterly unlike our sanitized modern cities. At the guild meeting, Eleanor participates in both religious and practical matters. The gathering begins with prayers for deceased members and discussion of the upcoming feast day of St. Nicholas, for which the guild will sponsor special devotions and distribute alms to the poor. The combination of spiritual concerns with practical charity typified the medieval integration of religious and social welfare functions. The meeting then turns to more mundane matters: managing the guild's collective property, organizing assistance for an elderly member now unable to care for herself, and collecting the regular dues that fund the guild's activities. Throughout these discussions, Eleanor engages as a full participant. While medieval society certainly limited women's roles in many spheres, these parish guilds often provided spaces where women, particularly widows and wives of established members, could exercise significant voice and agency. I hope you're feeling relaxed as we explore these fascinating aspects of medieval social structures. If you're enjoying this historical sleep journey, please consider sharing it with someone who appreciates both history and peaceful sleep content. Now, let's continue with Eleanor as she returns home for the evening hours. Evening responsibilities and family life. As the church bells toll for Vespers, the evening prayer around 6 o'clock, Eleanor makes her way back through the town streets, which are beginning to quiet as the working day comes to a close. Medieval communities generally followed the natural rhythm of daylight, with most productive work ceasing as darkness fell, due to the high cost and fire hazard of artificial lighting. The golden light of late afternoon casts long shadows between the buildings, and shopkeepers are placing their goods back inside, closing shutters against the coming night. Town gates will soon close until morning, securing the urban community against outside threats during the vulnerable hours of darkness. This daily rhythm of opening and closing, of bustling activity followed by quiet retreat, structured medieval urban life in ways fundamentally different from our 24-hour modern cities. Eleanor returns home to find the household preparing for the evening meal, supper, a lighter repast than the midday dinner. Thomas has returned from his afternoon business, and the apprentices are completing their final tasks of the day. The family's two children, a daughter of 12 and a son of 9, have been engaged in their own forms of education throughout the day. The daughter has been learning household management alongside Eleanor, while the son has split his time between basic schooling in reading and numbers and beginning instruction in his father's trade. The evening meal brings the family together once again around the trestle table. Supper typically consists of bread, perhaps leftover food from midday repurposed into pottage, a thick stew, and small beer or watered wine to drink. During this quieter family time, Thomas might share news from his business associates or discussions from the town council if he serves as a member. The children relate their day's activities and lessons, receiving guidance and correction from both parents. This family dynamic would feel both familiar and strange to modern observers. Medieval parents certainly loved their children deeply, but childhood itself was conceptualized differently than in our modern understanding. Children were integrated into the productive life of the household from early ages, with formal education, if any, focusing primarily on practical skills and moral instruction rather than academic exploration or creative development, as we might emphasize today. Imagine yourself at that medieval table as darkness gathers outside the small windows. The flickering light of rushlights or perhaps precious beeswax candles creates a warm glow, illuminating the faces of family members gathered in this intimate circle. The physical closeness of medieval family life, sharing rooms, beds, meals, and daily labor, fostered connections different from our more compartmentalized modern existence. The boundaries between work and home, business and family, public and private, were far more permeable than the rigid separations we often maintain today. After the evening meal, the household begins preparing for night. Medieval sleep patterns likely differed significantly from our modern expectation of a single uninterrupted 8-hour sleep period. Historical evidence suggests many medieval people practiced segmented sleep, with a first sleep beginning shortly after nightfall, followed by a wakeful period of an hour or two around midnight, and then a second sleep until dawn. During the midnight waking, people might pray, reflect, quietly converse with bedmates, or even visit neighbors before returning to sleep. Before retiring, Eleanor oversees final household security, ensuring doors are barred, fire hazards addressed, and valuable goods secured. Fire represented one of the most significant threats to medieval urban communities, with the potential to destroy entire neighborhoods of predominantly wooden structures. Every careful householder maintained vigilant fire prevention habits, banking coals properly, and ensuring candles and rushlights were safely positioned or extinguished before sleep. As darkness fully envelops the town, marked by the Compline bells, the final church service around 9 p.m., Eleanor and Thomas retire to their chamber. The merchant household settles into the profound darkness that characterized pre-industrial nights, a darkness deeper than most modern people ever experience in our electrically illuminated world. The absence of artificial light meant that medieval nights were governed by moon phases and seasons, with people experiencing dramatically different nighttime environments throughout the yearly cycle. In bed, Eleanor and Thomas might quietly discuss household matters, business concerns, or their children's futures before sleep overtakes them. The medieval marriage, while certainly existing within patriarchal social structures, often functioned as a working partnership, particularly in merchant households, where wives played such crucial economic roles. Historical records reveal many merchant husbands naming their wives as executors in their wills, a testament to the trust placed in these women's business acumen and judgment. As you rest in your own bed, listening to this historical journey, imagine the quiet of that medieval night. No electronic hums, no distant traffic, only the occasional call of the night watchman marking the hours, perhaps the bark of a dog, or the rustle of wind through the town. The profound silence of medieval nights created a different relationship with darkness, with sleep, with the vulnerable hours when consciousness slips away. If you're still awake and finding comfort in our historical journey, please remember to subscribe for more sleep stories that transport you through time while guiding you toward peaceful rest. Now let's explore some of the specific challenges that a merchant's wife, like Eleanor, would face in her medieval life. Health, hygiene, and medical challenges. The morning light finds Eleanor awake once again, beginning another day that will echo yesterday's patterns while bringing its own unique challenges. Today, we'll explore one of the most significant aspects of medieval life that differed dramatically from our modern experience: health, hygiene, and medical realities. Eleanor rises and performs her morning ablutions, washing her face and hands in a basin of water that the maidservant has carried up from the town well. Unlike modern homes with running water and sewage systems, every drop of water in a medieval household had to be physically transported from public wells or rivers, used as efficiently as possible, and then disposed of, typically by throwing it into the street gutter that ran down the center of urban thoroughfares. This laborious water cycle made frequent full-body bathing impractical for most medieval people, though contrary to popular misconception, personal hygiene remained important within the constraints of their water access. Eleanor, like most medieval women of means, maintains cleanliness through regular washing of hands, face, and intimate areas, complemented by changes of linen undergarments that absorb body oils and can be laundered more easily than outer clothing. Medieval hygiene practices were actually more sophisticated than many modern people assume. Public bathhouses existed in many towns until concerns about plague transmission led to their decline in the later medieval period. Recipes for soap, tooth cleaning powders, and personal deodorants appear in numerous medieval household manuals. The stereotype of the universally filthy medieval person represents a significant historical misunderstanding rather than accurate portrayal of typical hygiene. Eleanor's morning routine includes checking on her daughter, who has been experiencing menstrual cramps, a condition treated in medieval medicine with herbal remedies, including chamomile willow bark, which contains salicylic acid, similar to modern aspirin, and cramp bark. As the primary healthcare provider for her household, Eleanor maintains an extensive mental pharmacopoeia of plant-based treatments for common ailments. Medieval understanding of the body and its functions derived from ancient Greek and Roman medical theories, particularly the concept of the four humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Health was understood as a proper balance of these humors, with illness resulting from imbalance. Treatments aimed to restore equilibrium through various interventions, including diet modifications, herbal remedies, bloodletting for excess blood, and adjustments to living environments. While this framework lacks our modern understanding of germ theory, genetics, and biochemistry, it provided a systematic approach to healthcare that incorporated genuine, observational wisdom alongside misconceptions. Many herbal treatments used in medieval households have been validated by modern research to contain active medicinal compounds, demonstrating that empirical knowledge accumulated over generations often identified genuinely effective remedies despite limited theoretical understanding. As Eleanor prepares a warm infusion of herbs for her daughter, the familiar ritual of measuring dried plants, crushing them to release their essential oils, and steeping them in hot water represents a maternal care tradition passed through countless generations. The sensory experience, the earthy scent of the herbs, the careful attention to proportions, the tactile process of preparation, connected medieval women to an ancestral lineage of healers, maintaining family and community health through practical knowledge. For Eleanor's merchant household, access to healthcare options extended beyond home remedies. In larger medieval towns, a hierarchy of medical practitioners existed. University-trained physicians, expensive and relatively rare, primarily served nobility and wealthy urbanites. Barber surgeons performed procedures including bloodletting, tooth extraction, and treatment of wounds. Apothecaries dispensed medicinal substances, while midwives managed childbirth and women's health concerns. This diverse ecosystem of practitioners offered various approaches to healing, though their effectiveness varied dramatically by condition and treatment. The medieval experience of illness differed fundamentally from our modern expectations. Without effective treatments for many conditions, medieval people developed different psychological relationships with pain, disability, and mortality. Religious frameworks provided essential context for suffering, offering spiritual meaning and comfort where medical relief proved impossible. This integration of physical and spiritual approaches to illness represents neither simple superstition nor resigned fatalism, but rather a complex cultural adaptation to medical limitations that modern societies have largely forgotten. Eleanor's daughter's condition improves with the herbal remedy, but a more serious health concern looms in the household. One of Thomas's apprentices has developed a persistent cough and fever over recent days. In the medieval context, any respiratory illness raised alarm due to limited treatment options and the ever-present specter of communicable diseases like tuberculosis, known as consumption, that could devastate families and communities. The apprentice has been moved to a small chamber away from others, and Eleanor visits him, bringing both practical care and emotional support. She applies a poultice of mustard to his chest, a warming treatment still recognized in modern folk medicine for respiratory complaints, and ensures he remains hydrated with healing broths. She also arranges for a priest to visit, as spiritual care remained inseparable from physical treatment in medieval healthcare systems. For the merchant household, the illness of an apprentice represents both human concern and economic challenge. Each member of the medieval household contributed to its collective productivity, and extended illness created ripple effects through the family economy. Without formal sick leave or disability insurance, the care of ill household members fell entirely on the family unit and any guild support systems they might access. As you drift deeper into relaxation, I hope these explorations of medieval healthcare are proving both informative and soothing. If you're enjoying learning about these historical realities while preparing for sleep, please consider liking this video. Your support helps our historical sleep journey community continue to grow. Now let's follow Eleanor as she navigates one of the most significant challenges of medieval urban life, the omnipresent risk of fire. Environmental hazards, fire, weather, and urban dangers. While the apprentice's illness represents one type of household crisis, Eleanor must simultaneously remain vigilant against environmental threats that could devastate the family's security in an instant. Chief among these medieval urban hazards was fire, a constant danger in towns constructed primarily of timber, heated with open flames and illuminated by candles and rushlights. Eleanor's daily routine includes fire safety checks that would seem obsessive by modern standards, but represented essential vigilance in her context. She inspects the kitchen hearth, ensuring ashes are properly banked or extinguished. She reminds servants and family members about careful handling of candles, particularly near bedding or textiles. During dry summer months, these precautions intensify, with water buckets positioned strategically throughout the house for immediate response to any spark or ember. The medieval relationship with fire embodied profound ambivalence, essential for survival through cooking, heating, and light, yet potentially catastrophic in its destructive capacity. Urban records across medieval Europe document devastating town fires that could consume hundreds of buildings in hours, reducing generations of family wealth to ashes in a single night. These events remained etched in community memory for decades, referenced as chronological markers, the Great Fire of St. John's Eve, or 3 years after the Market Fire. Beyond individual household vigilance, medieval towns developed communal responses to fire risk. Many established night watches with specific fire spotting responsibilities. Some implemented building codes requiring stone construction for certain structures or mandating minimum distances between buildings. In Eleanor's town, ordinances prohibit certain high-risk activities like linen drying near open flames or the operation of kilns within the central town areas. Imagine how this constant awareness of fire vulnerability might shape psychological relationships with material possessions. The ever-present possibility of losing everything to flames fostered a different understanding of material security than our modern insurance-protected expectations. The medieval merchants' portable wealth, stored in gold, silver, jewels, or valuable commodities that could be quickly removed during fire, reflected this is environmental reality in ways we might find difficult to fully comprehend from our relatively secure, modern perspective. Weather presented another environmental challenge that Eleanor must navigate with careful planning. Medieval buildings provided much less insulation than modern structures, making both extreme heat and cold more immediately impactful on daily life. Without central heating, winter required constant attention to heat conservation, hanging tapestries on exterior walls for insulation, using bed curtains to create warmer sleeping microclimates, and maintaining the delicate balance of fire safety against the need for warming flames. Today, dark clouds gathering over the town signal an approaching rainstorm. Eleanor instructs servants to check the roof for loose tiles or thatch that might allow leakage, to secure shutters against wind, and to bring in drying laundry. The fabric awnings protecting shop merchandise from sun damage must also be retracted to prevent water collection and collapse. These weather preparations, performed multiple times per year as conditions changed, represented significant household labor, invisible in most historical accounts, but essential to maintaining the physical environment. Rain brings particular challenges to medieval urban environments. Without modern drainage systems, streets quickly become rivers of mud, mixed with animal waste and household refuse. A hazardous slurry that could contaminate wells, seep into ground floor storage areas, and create falls or other injuries. Eleanor postpones planned errands to St. Mary's Church and instead focuses on protecting household resources from water damage. The medieval experience of weather connected people more intimately to seasonal cycles and meteorological patterns than our climate-controlled modern lives. Agricultural calendars, religious festivals, and commercial activities all synchronized with these natural rhythms out of practical necessity. A merchant household like Eleanor's might adjust inventory based on seasonal travel conditions, storing more goods before winter made roads impassable, or arranging to receive shipments immediately after spring thaws reopened water transportation routes. Beyond fire and weather, medieval urban environments presented numerous other hazards requiring constant vigilance. Crime, particularly theft, remained a significant concern for merchant households with valuable goods. Eleanor and Thomas employ both physical security measures, strong locks, shuttered windows, strategic storage of valuables, and social strategies, maintaining good relationships with neighbors who might observe suspicious activities, employing household members who sleep near merchandise areas. The absence of professional police forces meant medieval urban security relied primarily on community vigilance and social cohesion, rather than specialized protective services. Neighbors watched for unusual activities, called out warnings, and responded to cries for help, creating security through social fabric rather than institutional structures. This system, while imperfect, fostered community interdependence, different from our modern relationships with professional protective services. Public health hazards posed another significant environmental challenge. Medieval towns lacked systematic waste management and water purification, creating conditions conducive to disease transmission. Eleanor maintains household practices aimed at mitigating these risks, having servants empty chamber pots in designated areas away from wells, maintaining the household's private privy rather than using public facilities, and insisting on hand washing before food preparation or consumption. These personal hygiene practices reflected both practical wisdom and the limitations of medieval medical understanding. Without germ theory, people could not fully comprehend disease transmission mechanisms, yet observational evidence had established connections between certain conditions and illness. Medieval public health ordinances often display surprising sophistication, regulating waste disposal, mandating clearance of refuse from streets, and establishing quarantine procedures during epidemic outbreaks. If you're still awake and enjoying our exploration of these medieval environmental challenges, I'd love to know which aspects of medieval life you find most interesting. Drop a comment below, and perhaps we can explore those topics in future historical sleep journeys. Now, let's follow Eleanor as she navigates the complexity of medieval social structures and religious life. Social hierarchy and religious life. As the rain subsides by mid-afternoon, Eleanor is finally able to make her delayed visit to St. Mary's Church. This journey through town after rainfall illustrates the stark social contrasts of medieval urban environments. And wealthy townhouses like hers feature overhanging upper stories that create sheltered walkways, protecting pedestrians from the worst of the muddy streets. Poorer neighborhoods lack these architectural features, with residents navigating through ankle-deep muck that ruins shoes and clothing, items prohibitively expensive for many medieval people to replace frequently. Eleanor's path to the church takes her through the town square, where the physical arrangement of buildings visually reinforces the social hierarchy. The church dominates one side with its stone construction and vertical emphasis, drawing eyes and thoughts heavenward. The town hall and guild buildings occupy another prominent edge, representing secular authority and commercial power. Around the periphery, smaller commercial structures house various trades and businesses, their size and construction quality reflecting the relative status of different crafts and merchants. This architectural manifestation of hierarchy mirrors the broader social structure that shapes Eleanor's daily existence. Medieval society operated through a complex web of overlapping statuses and affiliations, rather than the simplistic three-estate model: those who pray, those who fight, those who work, often presented in basic historical overviews. Within the third estate of non-noble, non-clerical people, significant distinctions existed between wealthy urban merchants like Thomas, skilled craftspeople, unskilled laborers, and the various gradations of rural agricultural workers. As a merchant's wife, Eleanor occupies an interesting social position, technically lower in the formal hierarchy than even minor nobility, yet potentially commanding greater actual wealth and living in more comfortable material circumstances than many lesser gentry. This created social tensions and status anxiety that medieval sumptuary laws attempted to address by restricting clothing, food, and other consumption based on social rank rather than mere ability to pay. These sumptuary laws reveal fascinating insights into medieval social dynamics. By prohibiting merchants from wearing certain fabrics, colors, or styles reserved for nobility, regardless of their ability to afford them, medieval authorities attempted to maintain visible markers of social distinction in the face of changing economic realities. The frequency with which such laws needed to be reissued suggests their limited effectiveness, as wealthy non-nobles consistently found ways to display their prosperity while technically complying with restrictions. Eleanor's own clothing for church, a high-quality wool kirtle in a deep blue shade, with a fitted surcoat of fine linen embroidered at the neckline and cuffs, walks this careful line between appropriate status display and avoiding inappropriate emulation of nobility. Her head covering, longer and of finer material than everyday wear, signifies both her marital status and her position among the respectable urban elite without overstepping social boundaries. Arriving at St. Mary's, Eleanor enters a space that exemplifies the complete integration of religion into medieval daily life. Unlike modern societies with clear separation between secular and religious spheres, medieval Christianity permeated all aspects of existence: social, economic, political, and personal. The church building itself serves not only for worship, but as community gathering space, location for contract witnessing, distribution point for charity, and physical manifestation of communal identity and pride. The sensory experience of entering the medieval church engages sight, sound, smell, and touch in ways designed to transport worshipers beyond ordinary existence into sacred time and space. Colored light filters through stained glass, illuminating interior spaces with symbolic meaning rather than mere practicality. The scent of incense, both spiritual symbol and practical odor masking in crowded, unwashed gatherings, creates olfactory separation from the outside world. The cool stone against fingertips dipped in holy water physically marks the transition from secular to sacred space. Eleanor has come to arrange a votive offering for the recovery of the ill apprentice, a candle to be burned before the statue of Saint Roch, patron of plague victims and the ill. This transaction represents the medieval understanding of spiritual economy operating alongside material economics. Just as goods and services exchanged in the marketplace, prayers and offerings created spiritual transactions believed to affect outcomes in both current life and the afterlife. The parish priest, Father Thomas, no relation to Eleanor's husband, greets her with familiar respect. In smaller towns, parish clergy remained integrated within the community, knowing parishioners personally and participating in both religious and secular aspects of town life. Eleanor explains the apprentice's illness and arranges for both the votive candle and a blessing to be brought to the sick room, spiritual interventions that accompany the physical treatments she has already implemented. This integration of physical and spiritual approaches to illness reflects not ignorance, but a more holistic understanding of human experience than our modern compartmentalized approach. Medieval people perceived no contradiction between practical herbal remedies and spiritual interventions, seeing both as essential aspects of healing the complete person, body and soul inseparably connected, rather than isolated systems. Before leaving the church, Eleanor takes a moment for personal prayer, kneeling before a side altar dedicated to the Virgin Mary. The feminine divine represented by Mary held particular significance for medieval women, offering both spiritual role model and compassionate intercessor who understood female experiences. The proliferation of Marian devotion throughout the medieval period provided women spiritual connection that partially counterbalanced their exclusion from clerical roles. Eleanor's prayers today encompass concerns both spiritual and practical, for the apprentice's recovery, for her children's futures, for her husband's safety in upcoming travel, and for guidance in managing the household and business responsibilities that sometimes feel overwhelming. This seamless integration of material and spiritual concerns typifies medieval religious experience, where divine assistance was sought for everyday matters as naturally as for profound spiritual questions. I hope you're feeling peaceful as we explore these fascinating aspects of medieval religious life. If you're enjoying drifting off to our historical journey, please consider subscribing to our channel for more sleep content that combines historical education with relaxation. Now, let's follow Eleanor as she navigates seasonal changes and preparations that structured the medieval year. Seasonal rhythms and festival life. As Eleanor emerges from the church into the afternoon light, she notices subtle signs of the changing season. Though medieval people lacked our precise calendar tracking, they maintained acute awareness of seasonal progression through environmental cues and agricultural cycles that structured their year far more fundamentally than our modern experience. It is late September in Eleanor's world, and the quality of light has begun to shift, the golden afternoon sun casting longer shadows between buildings as days gradually shorten. Market stalls display seasonal abundance: apples, late-season berries, nuts, and root vegetables harvested for storage through the coming winter. The smell of brewing permeates the air near the town brewery, as the cooler temperatures make fermentation more manageable than during summer's heat. These sensory indicators of autumn's arrival signal Eleanor to begin winter preparations, a substantial undertaking in medieval households where food preservation, fabric production, and fuel gathering needed completion before winter's limitations restricted these activities. Unlike our modern world of year-round availability, medieval lives synchronized intimately with seasonal rhythms out of absolute necessity. In the marketplace, Eleanor speaks with familiar vendors about securing winter provisions, arranging purchase of grain, honey, preserved fish, and other staples that will sustain the household through leaner months. These transactions often involve complex negotiations of price, quality, delivery timing, and payment terms, demonstrating the sophisticated economic understanding that medieval merchants and their wives necessarily developed. The conversation with a honey seller reveals another aspect of medieval economic relationships: the integration of social bonds with business transactions. The vendor inquires after Eleanor's family, shares news of her own children, and discusses the upcoming feast of Michaelmas, September 29th, building connection that strengthens their economic relationship. These personalized economic interactions characterized medieval commerce, where reputation, relationship, and community standing functioned as essential components of business success. The approaching Feast of Michaelmas held particular significance in the medieval calendar. One of the quarter days when rents came due and hiring contracts began or ended, Michaelmas marked a major economic transition point. The timing after harvest but before winter made it ideal for settling accounts, hiring servants for the coming year, and arranging winter provisions. The spiritual observance honoring the Archangel Michael intertwined with these practical economic functions, demonstrating again the integration of religious and material concerns in medieval life. As Eleanor continues through the market, she passes craftspeople preparing special goods for the coming festival. Bakers planning festival breads shaped with symbolic designs, candle makers producing decorative tapers, and textile workers creating banners for guild displays. Medieval festivals operated simultaneously as religious observance, community celebration, economic opportunity, and practical seasonal marker, multifunctional events that reinforced social bonds while addressing practical community needs. The preparation activities remind Eleanor of her own household responsibilities for the feast. As a prominent merchant family, they will host a dinner for business associates and fellow guild members after the church service. This hospitality, while genuinely generous, also serves strategic social and economic purposes, strengthening business networks, demonstrating prosperity appropriately, and fulfilling obligations to the community that supports their commercial success. Eleanor mentally inventories necessary preparations. Special market purchases, brewing arrangements with the local brewster for additional ale, scheduling extra baking, and preparing the house for guests. These hospitality obligations formed a significant aspect of a merchant wife's responsibilities, requiring sophisticated social skills alongside practical management abilities. The bells of St. Mary's toll none as Eleanor makes her way home, carrying market purchases and planning preparations for both immediate needs and upcoming festivities. The medieval day, structured by these regular bell soundings, created a shared temporal experience connecting all community members regardless of specific activities. Bells announced not just prayer times, but fire alarms, town council meetings, curfews, and other significant community moments, an auditory communication system that predated modern mass media. Arriving home, Eleanor finds Thomas in animated discussion with a business associate who has brought news of a trading opportunity. German merchants arriving in a nearby port town with Baltic amber and Russian furs seeking English wool in exchange. Such opportunities required rapid response, as medieval transportation limitations meant goods moved slowly, and competitors might secure advantageous positions through quicker action. Thomas and Eleanor step aside for private consultation, a common practice in merchant marriages where wives' business counsel played crucial roles in decision-making. They weigh factors including current wool inventory, potential profit margins, trustworthiness of the intermediary bringing this news, and household cash reserves needed for winter preparations. This joint deliberation reflects the economic partnership underlying many medieval merchant marriages, where wives' business acumen directly influenced family prosperity. Imagine the mental calculations Eleanor performs in this moment, balancing immediate opportunity against long-term security, weighing known household needs against potential profit, considering how this trade might affect their position within local commercial networks. Without spreadsheets, financial projections, or market analysis reports, she relies on experience, memory, and intuition, honed through years of practical business involvement, a different type of commercial intelligence than our data-driven modern approaches, but no less sophisticated within its context. After careful consideration, Eleanor and Thomas decide to pursue the opportunity, allocating a specific portion of their wool inventory while reserving the remainder for established trading relationships. Thomas will depart tomorrow for the port town, necessitating additional preparations. Eleanor must now manage both Michaelmas arrangements and the reorganization of household responsibilities during Thomas's absence, a common situation for merchant wives whose husbands' travel formed a regular feature of family business. Before evening, Eleanor gathers the household to explain adjusted responsibilities during Thomas's journey. The older apprentice will manage customer interactions in the shop, but Eleanor will handle all financial transactions and records. The maidservant will take on additional childcare duties while Eleanor divides her attention between household, business, and festival preparations. This flexible reallocation of tasks typifies the medieval household's adaptive functioning as both family unit and economic enterprise. As you continue relaxing deeper into sleep, I hope these explorations of medieval seasonal rhythms are both interesting and soothing. If you're enjoying this historical sleep journey, please tap the like button with a sleepy finger. Now, let's follow Eleanor through the evening hours as she begins preparations for both Thomas's journey and the approaching festival, travel, communication, and business networks. The morning finds the merchant household awake earlier than usual, preparing for Thomas's journey to the port town. Travel in the medieval period, even relatively short distances of 20 or 30 miles, required significant preparation and presented substantial challenges unfamiliar to our modern experience of rapid, convenient transportation. Eleanor has risen before dawn to oversee preparation of food for Thomas's journey. Travel bread baked extra firm for durability, hard cheese, dried fruit, and a small flask of wine diluted with water. These provisions must sustain him until he reaches wayside inns or the host's table at his destination. Medieval travelers rarely experienced hunger due to comprehensive hospitality networks, but carrying personal provisions provided security against unexpected delays. Thomas dresses for travel in clothing that differs from his town attire. His traveling cloak of thick wool has been treated with lanolin to provide some water resistance against unpredictable autumn weather. He wears sturdier boots suitable for muddy roads and carries a walking staff that serves both as walking aid on rough terrain and potential defense against roadside threats. These practical adaptations reflected the physical challenges of medieval transportation infrastructure, primarily dirt roads that became treacherous in wet weather. Security concerns also shaped Thomas's travel preparations. He distributes his travel money between several concealed pouches sewn into his clothing, rather than carrying an obvious purse. The trade documents and letters of introduction he carries, essential for establishing his legitimate business status in the port town, are secured in a waterproof leather case hung inside his clothing. While major roads in medieval England were safer than popular stereotypes suggest, prudent merchants nonetheless took precautions against opportunistic theft. Medieval business travel operated through sophisticated networks of relationship and reputation. Thomas carries letters from his guild master and the town's alderman validating his status as a legitimate merchant rather than an unlicensed trader, attempting to circumvent commercial regulations. These documents function somewhat like modern business credentials, establishing his place within recognized commercial hierarchies and authorizing him to conduct specific types of transactions. As Thomas makes final preparations, Eleanor provides last-minute instructions regarding pending business matters he should address with associates in the port town. She reminds him to inquire about the status of a delayed fabric shipment, to extend formal invitation to their Michaelmas feast to a particular merchant family, and to gather information about rumored changes to wool export regulations that might affect their business in coming months. This information exchange highlights the crucial role personal travel played in medieval business communication. In an era without telecommunications, physical presence enabled nuanced discussions, relationship building, and information gathering impossible through the limited written correspondence of the period. Merchants like Thomas essentially functioned as their own communication systems, personally carrying business intelligence between commercial centers. Thomas departs as the town gates open at dawn, joining several other travelers beginning their journeys with the new day. He expects to reach the port town by tomorrow evening if weather permits, a journey of approximately 30 miles that modern travelers would complete in less than an hour, but requires 2 full travel days in the medieval context. This dramatically different timescale for movement of people, goods, and information shaped every aspect of medieval life in ways we might struggle to fully comprehend from our instantaneous communication perspective. With Thomas departed, Eleanor assumes complete management responsibility for both household and business, a transition familiar to merchant wives who regularly operated as business proxies during husbands' absences. Her first task this morning involves the shop, where she must explain Thomas's journey to the apprentices and clarify modified operating procedures during his absence. The shop opens as usual at prime, with Eleanor supervising the display of goods and instructing the senior apprentice about which customers are authorized to purchase on credit and which must pay immediately. These credit decisions reflect intimate knowledge of community relationships, which families have reliable payment histories, which are experiencing temporary difficulties but remain trustworthy, and which have demonstrated problematic patterns requiring cash transactions. Consider how this personalized approach to business credit differs from our modern algorithmic determinations. Eleanor bases decisions on direct knowledge of customer circumstances, awareness of recent inheritances or losses, observations of spending patterns, and community reputation accumulated over years of interaction. This high-context approach to commercial trust created financial flexibility impossible in low-context systems, but required intensive social knowledge that modern global commerce cannot replicate at scale. By mid-morning, Eleanor shifts attention to festival preparations, reviewing household supplies against anticipated needs for the Michaelmas feast now just 5 days away. She consults with her cook about menu planning, traditional roast goose being the customary Michaelmas centerpiece supplemented with seasonal vegetables, special bread incorporating the last of the harvest's blackberries, and spiced wine that will showcase Thomas's imported cinnamon and nutmeg to appropriate business advantage. These preparations are interrupted by the arrival of a messenger, a young man employed by the regional merchant network to carry communications between towns. He delivers a sealed letter from Eleanor's cousin in London, containing both family news and valuable business intelligence about wool prices in the capital markets. This information may prove immediately relevant to Thomas's current negotiations if Eleanor can find means to communicate it quickly. The limitations of medieval communication technologies present Eleanor with a strategic decision. The messenger who delivered the letter is continuing to the port town tomorrow and could carry a response. However, his route takes him through several intermediate stops, meaning Thomas might not receive the information before concluding his negotiations. Alternatively, Eleanor could hire a dedicated courier to travel directly, more expensive but ensuring timely delivery of this potentially valuable market intelligence. After careful consideration of both cost and potential advantage, Eleanor decides to hire the dedicated courier. She quickly composes a letter updating Thomas on both the London market information and local developments since his departure. The letter, written on expensive parchment, is necessarily concise due to material constraints. Eleanor's neat, efficient handwriting maximizes information transfer within the limited space, a practical skill developed through years of business correspondence. Medieval long-distance communication operated through a fascinating hybrid of public and private systems. Official government communications traveled via royal messengers with authority to requisition fresh horses along established routes. Commercial communications like Eleanor's letter relied on merchant-organized networks supplemented by hired couriers for time-sensitive information. Religious institutions maintained their own communication channels between monasteries and diocesan centers. These overlapping systems created resilient information flow despite technological limitations, though at speeds modern people would find frustratingly slow. With the letter dispatched, Eleanor returns to household management with particular attention to her children's education, an aspect of daily life temporarily disrupted by festival preparations and Thomas's departure. Unlike aristocratic families who might employ dedicated tutors or send children to monastic schools, merchant families typically managed education through a combination of practical apprenticeship, basic literacy instruction, and direct parental teaching. Eleanor reviews Latin vocabulary with her son, who receives formal instruction from the parish clerk 3 times weekly. For merchant sons, basic Latin literacy provided advantage in a commercial world where significant documentation still utilized the language, though increasingly business conducted in vernacular languages. Her daughter's education focuses on household management, textile production, and the practical mathematics needed for commercial activities. Education designed to prepare her for future role as wife, household manager, and potential business partner. I hope you're feeling peaceful as we explore these fascinating aspects of medieval communication and education. If you're enjoying this historical sleep journey, please subscribe to join our community. Now, let's explore how Eleanor balances the approaching festival preparations with unexpected developments in Thomas's absence. Crisis management and community support. The following day brings unexpected challenges that test Eleanor's crisis management abilities. Skills essential for survival in the medieval world, where institutional safety nets existed primarily through community and religious structures rather than government services or corporate systems. The morning begins with concerning news. The ill apprentice's condition has worsened overnight, with higher fever and difficulty breathing. Such symptoms trigger particular alarm in medieval communities, regularly devastated by infectious disease outbreaks. Eleanor must balance appropriate caution against potential panic, making decisions without access to modern diagnostic tools or clear understanding of disease transmission mechanisms. Her first action involves moving the apprentice to a small outbuilding normally used for storage, a form of rudimentary quarantine based on observed patterns of illness spread rather than microbiological understanding. She arranges for the parish priest to visit for both spiritual comfort and practical assessment, as medieval clergy often developed considerable medical knowledge through regular exposure to illness and death in their communities. While awaiting the priest's arrival, Eleanor prepares intensified treatments, a stronger herbal infusion incorporating meadowsweet, containing salicylic compounds, willow bark, and honey to reduce fever and ease breathing difficulties. She also prepares a steam treatment with pine resin and thyme, correctly intuiting that the aromatic compounds might ease respiratory distress. These treatments reflect the sophisticated empirical medical knowledge developed through generations of observation, despite lacking theoretical understanding of the biochemical mechanisms involved. Father Thomas arrives promptly, having prioritized this visit among his many parish responsibilities. The priest's dual role as spiritual guide and community resource exemplifies the medieval integration of practical and religious functions within single institutions and individuals. After examining the apprentice, he confirms Eleanor's concerns about serious illness, but provides reassurance that symptoms differ from plague indicators that would necessitate stricter isolation protocols. Medieval communities developed sophisticated collective responses to illness that merit more respect than modern stereotypes of superstitious ignorance suggest. While lacking germ theory, they recognized patterns of disease transmission and implemented isolation practices that genuinely reduced contagion spread. Religious institutions functioned as essential infrastructure during health crises, providing both practical care through monastic hospitals and psychological comfort through ritual practices believed to protect communities. With the priest's guidance, Eleanor develops a care plan for the apprentice, regular herbal treatments, liquid nourishment to prevent dehydration, and scheduled prayer observations believed to support both spiritual and physical healing. She dispatches her maidservant to notify the apprentice's family living in a nearby village, understanding the importance of kinship networks in medieval healthcare systems. This medical crisis coincides with developments in the business sphere, as a messenger arrives from Thomas. He has successfully initiated negotiations with the Baltic merchants, but requires additional documentation from the household records to finalize arrangements. Eleanor must now balance urgent business matters with healthcare management, highlighting the multifaceted responsibilities of medieval merchant wives during husbands' absences. In the solar, Eleanor reviews business ledgers to locate the needed documentation, while simultaneously directing household activities through periodic instructions to servants and children. This mental multitasking characterized women's work across medieval social classes. The constant integration of domestic care, economic production, and household management without clear boundaries between these spheres. The business documents located and dispatched to Thomas, Eleanor turns attention to the approaching Michaelmas celebrations, now complicated by both the apprentice's illness and Thomas's extended absence, as his message indicated delays in negotiations that might prevent his return before the festival. These developments require Eleanor to reconsider feast arrangements, potentially adjusting guest lists and presentation to appropriately reflect the household circumstances without damaging important business relationships. Consider how this adaptive planning differs from our modern expectation of events proceeding according to fixed schedules. Medieval people necessarily developed greater tolerance for contingency and adjustment, expecting plans to change based on factors beyond control like weather, illness, or travel delays. This flexibility fostered resilience against disruption that our more rigidly scheduled modern lives sometimes lack, despite our technological advantages. By mid-afternoon, additional complications arise when messengers bring news of unprecedented early autumn flooding affecting roads between the port town and home. This development threatens both Thomas's eventual return journey and immediate business operations. As expected, deliveries may face delays that create inventory shortages. Eleanor must quickly develop contingency plans addressing both commercial and festival needs under these changing conditions. Her response demonstrates the crisis management skills developed through years of practical experience. She dispatches the senior apprentice to negotiate temporary inventory sharing with allied merchant families, a cooperative arrangement that enables competing businesses to cover shortages for one another during supply disruptions. She adjusts the Michaelmas feast menu to replace items requiring delayed shipments with locally available alternatives, preserving the event's social function while adapting to practical constraints. These problem-solving activities are briefly interrupted by a visit from the guild mistress, the senior woman among the merchant guild families who serves as unofficial coordinator for community support during household crises. Learning of the apprentice's illness and Thomas's delayed return, she offers both practical assistance in festival preparations and social legitimization by confirming her family's attendance despite Thomas's absence, a significant gesture that signals to the broader community that Eleanor's temporary leadership deserves full recognition. This interaction highlights the importance of women's informal networks in medieval communities. While excluded from formal governmental and guild leadership positions, women created parallel authority structures that profoundly influenced community functioning through control of information flow, allocation of mutual aid resources, and collective enforcement of social expectations. These networks operated less visibly than male-dominated formal institutions, but provided essential resilience mechanisms for families and communities. The guild mistress also brings information about a merchant family recently arrived from London with news of political developments that might affect trade regulations. Recognizing the potential business significance, Eleanor arranges to visit them the following day, balancing immediate crisis management with longer-term business intelligence gathering in Thomas's absence. As you drift deeper towards sleep, I hope these explorations of medieval crisis management and community support networks are proving both informative and soothing. If you're enjoying this historical journey, please consider sharing it with friends who appreciate both history and peaceful sleep content. Now, let's observe how Eleanor navigates the complex preparations for the Michaelmas feast while managing ongoing household challenges. Feast preparations and social diplomacy. The days before Michaelmas transform Eleanor's already busy household into a center of intensified activity. Medieval festivals, both religious and seasonal, required elaborate preparation that engaged entire communities in collective expressions of faith, social cohesion, and cultural identity. Morning finds Eleanor reviewing festival arrangements with her cook and senior maidservant. The Michaelmas feast they plan will serve approximately 20 guests, fellow merchant families, parish clergy, and key business associates. While modest compared to aristocratic entertainments, this gathering represents significant investment for a merchant household and requires careful planning to appropriately display prosperity without crossing into inappropriate ostentation for their social station. The menu planning demonstrates both practical constraints and status display considerations of medieval hospitality. The traditional Michaelmas goose takes center stage, its preparation requiring special arrangements with the local baker, as few private homes had ovens large enough for roasting substantial poultry. Side dishes showcase seasonal abundance while subtly highlighting Thomas's trade connections, preserved fruits, imported spices, and fine white bread that distinguished merchant tables from humbler fare. Eleanor inspects the household linens to be used for the feast, finely woven tablecloths and hand towels for guests to dry their hands after washing in scented water before dining. These textiles represent significant household investment, with high-quality table linens frequently appearing in merchant wills as valuable bequests. Their pristine appearance at the feast will silently communicate household prosperity and Eleanor's domestic management skills to the assembled guests. Medieval dining etiquette developed sophisticated rules governing everything from hand washing to seating arrangements to appropriate conversation topics. These social codes function simultaneously as practical hygiene measures and markers of status distinction. The ability to properly host formal meals according to these expectations demonstrated both material resources and cultural capital, showcasing the household's rightful place within respectable society through mastery of proper behaviors rather than mere wealth display. Beyond food preparations, Eleanor oversees the transformation of the hall into an appropriate dining space. Extra trestle tables are borrowed from neighbors or the parish guild hall, following the medieval practice of community resource sharing for special events. Rushlights and precious beeswax candles are prepared in greater numbers than everyday use, as proper illumination for evening feasting symbolized generous hospitality. Servants remove accumulated rushes from the floor and replace them with fresh, strewing herbs that will release pleasant fragrances as guests walk across them. These physical preparations proceed alongside Eleanor's management of complex social dynamics. The seating arrangement for the feast requires diplomatic consideration of each guest's relative status, relationship to the household, and relationships with other guests. Medieval society operated through minutely calibrated status distinctions that required constant reinforcement through ceremonial recognition. A merchant's wife, like Eleanor, needed intimate understanding of these social hierarchies to avoid offense that might damage business relationships or community standing. The situation grows more complex, with confirmation that Thomas will indeed remain absent during the feast due to extended negotiations. His absence creates both practical challenges: who should assume the host position traditionally held by the male household head, and potential social vulnerability if guests interpret it as diminishing the event's importance. Eleanor's solution demonstrates the adaptive social intelligence cultivated by medieval merchant wives, navigating complex business-social intersections. She arranges for her husband's closest business associate, a senior guild member, to symbolically co-host the event, providing male presence at the high table without undermining her actual authority over the household. She also strategically shares news of Thomas's promising trade negotiations with key community members, who will disseminate this information throughout the feast, transforming his absence from potential weakness into evidence of important business development. Consider the sophisticated social calculations this arrangement represents. Eleanor must balance asserting sufficient authority to maintain her household status, while avoiding appearing to usurp male prerogatives in ways that might alienate conservative guests. She must transform potential disappointment at Thomas's absence into appreciation for the promising business opportunities keeping him away. She must ensure the substitute male host receives appropriate honor while maintaining her actual control over household resources and arrangements. These intricate social maneuvers required emotional intelligence and strategic thinking that belie simplistic views of medieval women as passive or publicly submissive. The day before the feast brings final preparations and minor crises requiring immediate resolution. The promised goose arrives from the baker, smaller than expected, necessitating last-minute menu adjustments to ensure sufficient food for all guests. The illness of a neighboring merchant's wife requires recalculation of seating arrangements to accommodate her absence, while avoiding inauspicious gaps at the table. A delayed spice delivery forces substitution of locally available flavorings for certain dishes, requiring creative culinary adaptation. Throughout these challenges, Eleanor maintains the outward composure expected of a merchant's wife, while internally managing significant stress, a balancing act familiar to women across historical periods. Her management style reflects medieval leadership approaches that emphasize personal relationship, direct supervision, and visible presence, rather than written directives or delegated authority. She works alongside servants in final preparations, simultaneously directing activities and participating in them, modeling expected effort while maintaining clear hierarchical distinction. By evening, preparations near completion, allowing Eleanor brief respite before tomorrow's festivities. In a quiet moment, she visits the ailing apprentice, whose condition has stabilized though not significantly improved. This pastoral care demonstrates the medieval integration of business and family relationships, apprentices occupying an intermediate status between employee and family member, entitled to care similar to that given blood relations. Eleanor's evening prayers this night focus on thanksgiving and petition, gratitude for household resources that enable proper festival observance, and petition for Thomas's successful negotiations and safe return. This spiritual practice illustrates how medieval religious observance provided psychological resources for managing uncertainties beyond human control, offering both emotional comfort and sense of participating in forces influencing unpredictable outcomes. As we near the conclusion of our historical sleep journey, I hope you're feeling peaceful and relaxed. If you've enjoyed this exploration of medieval life through Eleanor's experiences, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel for more historical sleep journeys. Now, let's experience the Michaelmas feast itself as our narrative draws toward its close. The Michaelmas feast and reflection. Michaelmas dawns clear and cool, favorable weather that medieval people would interpret as both practical convenience and auspicious blessing. The festival day begins with church bells calling the community to special worship services honoring St. Michael the Archangel, whose protection against spiritual and physical dangers held particular significance in the uncertain medieval world. Eleanor rises early, dressing in her finest clothing appropriate to both religious observance and hosting responsibilities. Her festival attire includes a kirtle of fine wool dyed deep green, an expensive color derived from multiple dyeing processes, with a surcoat of lighter wool embroidered at neck and sleeves. Her headdress for special occasions features finer linen than everyday wear, with subtle decorative stitching around the edges demonstrating both wealth and skilled needlework without crossing into inappropriate ostentation for her merchant status. The household processes to church together, Eleanor, her children, and servants presenting unified representation of the family's prosperity and piety. Their seating within the church reflects social standing, not front pews, which would be reserved for nobility, but respected placement appropriate to prosperous merchant status. This physical arrangement within sacred space reinforces the social hierarchy while simultaneously emphasizing Christian community transcending worldly distinctions. The Michaelmas service incorporates special prayers, music, and sermon themes reflecting the Archangel's significance. Medieval religious observance engaged all senses: visual splendor through church decoration and clerical vestments, olfactory experience through incense, auditory stimulation through music and Latin liturgy, and tactile engagement through ritualized movements and physical contact with sacred objects. This multisensory worship created immersive spiritual experience that modern, more intellectualized religious practice rarely replicates. Michaelmas held particular significance in the medieval calendar as one of the quarter days marking seasonal and economic transitions. Falling near the autumn equinox, it represented completion of harvest, beginning of autumn planting, and commencement of the agricultural year's dormant phase. Economically, it marked when rents came due, hiring contracts began or ended, and accounts required settlement. This integration of natural cycles, economic necessity, and religious observance typifies the medieval world's holistic approach to time and meaning, distinct from our compartmentalized modern experience. Following church services, the community briefly gathers in the town square for announcements affecting collective welfare, upcoming road repairs requiring shared labor, arrangements for winter night watches, and reminders of seasonal regulations regarding fire safety as heating needs increase. This public information sharing before dispersing to individual household celebrations demonstrates the medieval balance between communal identity and family-centered social organization. Returning home, Eleanor finds final feast preparations underway. Fires built up to proper cooking heat, tables arranged, and servants preparing for guest arrival. She performs final inspections, adjusting table settings, and ensuring proper preparation of the hand-washing arrangements that will begin the formal meal. These last-minute refinements reflect both practical hospitality and the understanding that guests will evaluate the household's management, and by extension its business reliability, through these visible demonstrations of organizational competence. Guests begin arriving following the church service. First, the co-host merchant selected to help compensate for Thomas's absence, then families roughly in order of social prominence. Eleanor greets each arrival personally, performing the expected rituals of welcome that affirm social bonds and mutual respect. These formalized interactions, specific greeting phrases, prescribed compliments, ritualized expressions of gratitude for attendance, created reliable social scripts that facilitated interaction across status differences while maintaining appropriate distinctions. The meal begins with ceremonial hand-washing, servants presenting scented water and towels first to highest status guests and proceeding through the gathering in descending social order. This ritual, combining practical hygiene with status affirmation, exemplifies how medieval social practices frequently served multiple functions simultaneously. The guests then arrange themselves according to Eleanor's carefully planned seating, recognizing through their compliance her authority as hostess, despite Thomas's absence. Throughout the meal, Eleanor navigates complex social currents while ensuring practical hospitality functions proceed smoothly. She guides conversation toward topics advantageous to the household's interests, subtly highlighting Thomas's promising trade negotiations, acknowledging others' business successes to cement alliances, and gracefully redirecting discussion away from potentially divisive subjects. This conversational management represents sophisticated social intelligence, fundamental to medieval business networking and relationship-based commercial systems. The feast foods themselves communicate multiple messages beyond mere nourishment. The traditional roast goose honors religious custom while demonstrating household prosperity through provision of expensive meat. Side dishes featuring imported spices subtly advertise Thomas's trade connections and inventory quality. The fine white bread, a luxury beyond many households' means, signals appropriate status distinction. Even the quality of table service, sufficient cups rather than shared drinking vessels, individual trenchers rather than communal serving platters, communicates prosperity appropriate to merchant standing. Imagine experiencing this feast through medieval senses. The smoky fragrance of roasted meats mingling with spices exotic to European palates, the varying textures of foods eaten primarily with fingers and knives rather than multiple specialized utensils, the physical awareness of hunger satisfied after church services elevated appetite, the sensory richness of experiencing these pleasures in community rather than the isolated dining many modern people practice. These embodied experiences created meaning beyond nutrition, connecting individuals to community, present to tradition, material to spiritual and integrated sensory understanding. As the meal progresses, the gathering shifts from formal dining to more relaxed socialization. Children who had been expected to demonstrate proper behavior during the meal are permitted to play more freely in adjacent spaces. Business discussions emerge organically among merchant attendees, with informal commercial arrangements and information exchanges occurring alongside social interaction. These blended social-commercial conversations demonstrate how medieval business operated through relationship networks rather than impersonal transactions. Commercial trust built on personal knowledge and community reputation rather than contractual formality alone. Throughout the celebration, Eleanor maintains awareness of multiple social dynamics, ensuring proper attention to higher status guests, facilitating connections between attendees who might benefit from introduction, and monitoring overall mood to address any tensions before they disturb the gathering's harmony. This social orchestration requires constant attention even while appearing effortlessly hospitable, a performance of ease that masks significant emotional and mental labor. Musicians arranged for the occasion, perhaps a local piper and drummer, provide entertainment following the meal. Music for merchant celebrations would be simpler than aristocratic entertainments, but still represent luxury beyond ordinary household resources. Dancing might follow for younger attendees, while elder merchants engage in deeper conversation about matters affecting their collective interests, guild regulations, trade conditions, or local politics impacting commerce. As afternoon transitions toward evening, the feast gradually concludes with guests departing according to social custom, higher status visitors leaving first rather than last, as in modern practice, allowing subordinate attendees to demonstrate respect through remaining until superiors have been properly honored with full attention during their presence. If you're still awake and enjoying this historical journey, I'd love for you to join our community by subscribing to the channel. Your support helps create more of these detailed historical sleep journeys. Now, let's conclude our narrative with Eleanor's reflections as the feast concludes and the household returns to its normal rhythms, childbirth and motherhood in medieval times. Our journey with Eleanor continues as we explore another fundamental aspect of medieval women's lives, childbirth and motherhood. While we followed Eleanor through her daily responsibilities, let us now delve into her experiences as a mother, including memories of her own childbearing years and her role in supporting other women through this dangerous yet revered passage. Eleanor wakes before dawn to a message delivered by a breathless young girl. Her neighbor Agnes, wife of a fellow cloth merchant, has begun her labor with her first child. In medieval communities, childbirth mobilized networks of female support that crossed social boundaries, creating rare spaces of women's authority largely independent from male oversight. Eleanor, having safely delivered 2 children of her own and assisted at numerous births, is known in the merchant community for her steady hands and practical knowledge. She dresses quickly in practical clothing suitable for the long hours ahead, gathering her small bundle of birth helping tools, clean linen cloths, a special knife kept solely for cutting umbilical cords, dried herbs including raspberry leaf and ergot for difficult labor, and blessed candles from Candlemas believed to provide both practical light and spiritual protection during birth. These preparations reflect the integration of practical medical knowledge with spiritual practices that characterized medieval healthcare. Childbirth in the medieval period existed in a curious space between everyday occurrence and extraordinary danger, with average completed families including 5 to 7 children among those who survived to adulthood. Most women experienced multiple pregnancies. Yet each birth represented genuine mortal risk in an era without surgical interventions, antibiotics, or blood transfusions. Maternal mortality rates reached approximately 1 to 2% per birth, seemingly small until multiplied across multiple pregnancies, resulting in significant lifetime risk that medieval women faced, with remarkable courage and practical preparation. As Eleanor walks through pre-dawn streets toward Agnes's home, she reflects on her own childbearing experiences, memories both profound and harrowing. Her first pregnancy at age 19 came after 2 years of marriage, the 9-month wait filled with both anticipation and fear given the known dangers. Labor began during a spring afternoon while Thomas was traveling, the pain building gradually until Eleanor recognized the unmistakable pattern indicating active birth had begun. The birthing room Eleanor now enters in Agnes's home mirrors her own experience, windows covered to create a warm, dimly lit environment believed to ease labor, a birth chair positioned for the delivery itself, and a fire built up to provide both warmth and ready hot water. Female relatives and neighbors already attend Agnes, creating the exclusively feminine space traditional for childbirth across most medieval cultures. Men, including husbands, remained excluded from birth rooms by both custom and practical division of gender responsibilities. Eleanor immediately assesses the situation with experienced eyes. Agnes shows the exhaustion of early labor that has continued through the night without sufficient progression. Drawing on knowledge passed through generations of women, Eleanor prepares a strengthening broth with honey and herbs, encourages Agnes to walk supported between contractions, and leads the women in prayers to Saint Margaret, patron saint of childbirth, whose intercession was believed particularly powerful during difficult deliveries. The following hours demonstrate the intensely physical nature of medieval childbirth assistance. Eleanor and other attendants physically support Agnes's body during contractions, apply counterpressure to ease back pain, and provide continuous encouragement through a process understood as both natural and perilous. Without pharmacological pain management, these physical comfort measures and unwavering emotional support represented the primary tools available to birth attendants. Consider the profound intimacy of this female support network during history's most vulnerable hours. Women who might occupy different social positions or maintain formal relationships in public spaces created temporary equality within the birth room, united by shared experience of female embodiment that transcended other distinctions. This momentary dissolution of hierarchy within intensely physical shared experience created bonds between women that modern medicalized birth rarely replicates. As Agnes's labor intensifies toward transition, Eleanor guides her to the birthing chair, a specialized seat with open bottom and supportive arms that utilized gravity's assistance, unlike later practices of horizontal delivery. The chair itself represents sophisticated understanding of birth biomechanics developed through generations of empirical observation rather than formal study. Eleanor positions herself to receive the child while simultaneously monitoring Agnes's condition for dangerous complications requiring emergency interventions. The birth proceeds without major complication, though Agnes's exhaustion requires Eleanor to reach internally and guide the infant's shoulders, a delicate maneuver requiring experience and steady hands. When the newborn daughter finally emerges into Eleanor's waiting hands, the room transforms from focused tension to relieved celebration. Eleanor efficiently cuts and ties the umbilical cord, wraps the infant in prepared linens, and places her briefly in a waiting attendant's arms while turning attention to delivering the afterbirth, a critical phase where dangerous hemorrhage might still occur. With mother and child stabilized, the practical aspects of postpartum care begin immediately. The infant receives her first cleansing with warm water and olive oil, then swaddling in the tight wrapping believed to ensure proper growth of limbs. Agnes is helped to a prepared bed with fresh linens, given strengthening broth, and positioned to begin nursing, initiated quickly, both for the infant's nourishment and to stimulate uterine contraction that prevents dangerous bleeding. Eleanor supervises these immediate postpartum arrangements before finally holding the newborn herself. As she presents the swaddled infant to Agnes, she leads the traditional prayers of thanksgiving for safe delivery, genuine spiritual gratitude for survival through dangers all present understand intimately. This moment of relief and gratitude transcends mere social ritual, embodying the authentic spiritual meaning that permeated medieval life transitions. Medieval postpartum practices reflected sophisticated understanding of recovery needs despite lacking modern medical framework. New mothers typically maintained lying-in periods of several weeks, during which female relatives and neighbors provided household assistance, allowing gradual recovery from birth's physical demands. Specialized foods believed to promote healing and milk production featured prominently in postpartum diets. These community support practices recognized childbirth's significance and ensured practical assistance during vulnerable recovery periods. As morning fully arrives, Eleanor prepares to leave Agnes in her female relative's capable hands, promising to return tomorrow to check her recovery progress. Before departing, she participates in preliminary discussions about baptism arrangements, ideally performed within days of birth, given high infant mortality rates. This urgency reflected genuine spiritual concern for unbaptized infant souls, rather than mere superstition, demonstrating how religious belief provided meaningful framework for navigating life's precariousness. Walking home in the brightening morning light, Eleanor reflects on her own children's births and the countless deliveries she has attended over the years. Each represents both ordinary life continuation and extraordinary transition, moments when women's practical knowledge, physical support, and spiritual practices created essential safety within inherently dangerous passage. These birth rooms, exclusively female spaces where women's authority remained unquestioned, provided rare domains of feminine power within patriarchal medieval structures. I hope you're finding this exploration of medieval childbirth practices soothing, yet informative, as you drift towards sleep. If you're enjoying learning about these intimate aspects of medieval women's lives, please consider subscribing to our channel for more historical sleep journeys. Now, let's follow Eleanor as she returns home to her household and reflects on her own experiences of motherhood. Medieval education and children's lives. Eleanor returns home from Agnes's successful delivery to find her household already awake and engaged in daily activities. Her children, Catherine, now 12, and Richard, 9, are central figures in the merchant household, their education and development representing both emotional priority and practical investment in the family's future security. Unlike modern childhood with its extended period of dependency and focus on individual development, medieval children integrated into productive household roles from early ages. Eleanor's children, while receiving education appropriate to their merchant status, simultaneously contribute to family enterprises through age-appropriate tasks that develop skills they will need as adults. This apprenticeship model of childhood created different developmental trajectories than our modern educational approach. Eleanor finds Catherine practicing her needlework while simultaneously overseeing a younger kitchen maid kneading dough, the dual activity demonstrating how education and practical household contribution blend seamlessly in medieval childhood. The fine embroidery Catherine works on represents both practical skill development and artistic expression, creating decorative elements that might later adorn household linens or church vestments, donated to demonstrate family piety and prosperity. Richard sits with the senior apprentice reviewing arithmetic calculations relevant to wool measurement and pricing, his merchant father's trade requiring sophisticated mathematical understanding alongside practical knowledge of materials and markets. Unlike aristocratic boys educated primarily in martial and governance skills, merchant sons needed practical numeracy and literacy for commercial success, a more immediately applied educational focus that characterized urban children's learning. Medieval childhood education varied dramatically based on social status, gender, and geographical location, creating diverse experiences rather than universal patterns. Urban children generally received more formal education than rural counterparts, while boys accessed institutional learning unavailable to most girls. However, simplistic views of universal female illiteracy misrepresent the nuanced reality. Merchant and craftsmen's daughters often received practical literacy and numeracy training essential for potential roles in family businesses. Eleanor's own educational background exemplifies these nuanced patterns. As daughter of a successful wool merchant, she received training in household management, basic literacy in the vernacular language, and practical mathematics needed for commercial record-keeping. This education occurred not through formal schooling, but through gradual integration into adult responsibilities under her mother's guidance, a pattern she now reproduces with Catherine, whose education focuses on developing skills for her anticipated future as a merchant's wife herself. Richard's education follows more institutional patterns alongside practical household training. 3 mornings weekly, he attends the parish school where the clerk teaches basic Latin, essential for understanding legal documents and participating in church services. This formal instruction complements his practical apprenticeship in merchant skills learned alongside his father and the household's senior employees, an integrated educational approach preparing him for both practical commerce and appropriate participation in civic and religious institutions. Eleanor reviews her children's progress, examining Catherine's embroidery with critical eye while questioning Richard about his arithmetic calculations. This direct maternal supervision characterized medieval childhood education, regardless of formal schooling arrangements. Parents maintained primary responsibility for children's development, with mothers particularly involved in daughters' training and early education of sons before they transitioned to male-dominated instruction. The content of medieval education reflected different priorities than modern curricula. Moral instruction and practical skills took precedence over abstract knowledge or critical thinking valued in contemporary education. Children learned appropriate behavior for their social station, religious obligations and practices, and skills directly applicable to their anticipated adult roles. This pragmatic focus created education inseparable from socialization into established community norms rather than encouraging individual intellectual exploration. Consider how this educational approach shaped medieval children's development of identity and purpose. Modern children often face questions about what they want to become. a fundamentally individual framing that would seem strange to medieval parents and children alike. For Catherine and Richard, future roles appear largely predetermined by birth status and gender, yet within these parameters, they develop individual competencies and characteristics. This balance between communal determination and personal development created different psychological foundations than our contemporary emphasis on individual self-actualization. After reviewing her children's morning progress, Eleanor integrates them into household activities appropriate to their ages and developing skills. Catherine accompanies her mother to review food preservation preparations, learning through observation, and gradually increasing responsibility how to manage household resources across seasonal availability. Richard joins his father's apprentices in the shop for the afternoon, learning to assess wool quality through increasingly refined sensory discrimination, touch, smell, and visual inspection skills developed through guided practice rather than formal instruction. Physical discipline formed another aspect of medieval childhood different from modern approaches. While medieval parents certainly loved their children deeply, prevailing religious and cultural beliefs emphasized the importance of strict correction to properly form children's moral character. Eleanor, like most medieval parents, employs occasional physical punishment alongside verbal correction, though tempered by genuine concern for children's welfare and development, rather than arbitrary cruelty often depicted in simplified historical accounts. The practical integration of children into household production created educational opportunities throughout daily activities. As Eleanor supervises Catherine's first independent attempt at preparing a medicinal infusion, she provides ongoing guidance about plant identification, proper preparation methods, and traditional knowledge of effectiveness for various ailments. This knowledge transmission through guided practical activity, rather than abstract study separated from application, characterized most medieval learning across social classes. For merchant children like Catherine and Richard, education extended beyond household skills to include developing social competencies necessary for successful business operations. Eleanor consciously models appropriate interaction with various community members when children accompany her on errands, demonstrating different conversational patterns, body language, and negotiation approaches depending on the social status of those encountered. This sophisticated social education prepared children for navigating complex urban hierarchies essential to merchant success. Medieval childhood proceeded through less clearly delineated developmental stages than modern age-based categorization suggests. Children moved from infancy to early integration in household work around age 7, when spiritual tradition suggested they reached the age of reason, then gradually assumed increasing responsibilities until essentially functioning as small adults by early adolescence. Marriage often marked final transition to full adulthood, occurring in late teens for girls and early 20s for boys among merchant families, earlier than aristocratic marriages, but later than peasant unions typically formed. Eleanor's planning for her children's futures demonstrates the forward-thinking approach typical of successful merchant families. Already, she and Thomas have begun preliminary discussions with another merchant family about potential future marriage for Catherine. Not immediate arrangements given her young age, but establishing connections that might prove advantageous when appropriate time arrives. These early discussions reflect medieval understanding of marriage as economic and social alliance between families rather than primarily romantic connection between individuals. For Richard, educational investments aim toward eventual partnership in his father's business, with potential for expansion through strategic marriage, connecting to complementary trading networks. While modern perspectives might view this predetermined pathing as limiting, within medieval understanding, it represented security and opportunity within established social frameworks, the protective certainty of known futures rather than restriction from imagined alternatives not realistically available within historical context. If you're finding this exploration of medieval childhood and education interesting as you drift towards sleep, please consider sharing our channel with friends who appreciate both historical insight and peaceful sleep content. Now, let's explore another fascinating aspect of Eleanor's world, the material culture and physical environment that shaped daily medieval experience. Material culture: clothing, possessions, and physical environment. As afternoon light filters through the small windows of Eleanor's home, it illuminates the material world that shapes and reflects medieval daily experience. The physical objects, clothing, and built environments surrounding Eleanor and her family tell stories of technological capability, aesthetic preferences, resource limitations, and social signaling that defined medieval material culture. Eleanor takes advantage of the good light to examine household textiles needing repair, an ongoing responsibility in an era when clothing and household fabrics represented substantial investment due to entirely manual production processes. Each garment required multiple stages of labor-intensive creation: growing and harvesting fibers, flax for linen, wool from sheep, cleaning and preparing raw materials, spinning fibers into thread, weaving thread into cloth, cutting and sewing garments, and finally, decorating finished pieces with embroidery or other embellishments. The garment Eleanor examines, her husband's best wool tunic showing wear at cuffs and collar, represents significant household investment worth preserving through careful maintenance. Unlike modern fast fashion, with its disposable approach to clothing, medieval garments received ongoing repair, eventually being recut for children or servants, and finally recycled into quilting materials or rags once beyond wearable condition. This full life cycle use of textiles reflected both economic necessity and cultural values that viewed wasteful consumption as morally problematic. Eleanor's own clothing exemplifies the layered functionality of medieval garments. Her linen shift, the undergarment worn next to skin, provides both comfort and protection for outer clothing from body oils. Over this, she wears a woolen kirtle, basic gown, with separately attached sleeves secured by lacing, a practical design allowing sleeve replacement when worn or seasonal adjustment for temperature regulation. An apron protects these garments during work activities, while her linen head covering signals her married status according to cultural expectations. Medieval clothing served multiple simultaneous functions beyond mere covering or weather protection. Garments immediately signaled critical social information, including gender, marital status, approximate social rank, and often specific occupation or religious status. The visual legibility of these social markers through clothing created immediate identification impossible in our more sartorially homogeneous modern society. Additionally, the quality, color, and decoration of clothing operated as portable wealth display, particularly important for merchant families whose prosperity needed appropriate visual expression. The interior space Eleanor occupies reveals equally meaningful aspects of medieval material culture. Unlike modern homes with specialized rooms for specific functions, medieval urban dwellings featured multi-purpose spaces adapted throughout the day for different activities. The hall where Eleanor works served as dining area during meals, social gathering space when guests visited, and household workspace between these occasions. This flexible use of limited space characterized medieval urban living, with furniture designed for easy rearrangement or multiple purposes. The material possessions visible around Eleanor reflect both practical necessity and strategic display appropriate to merchant status. Basic functional items, cooking vessels, storage containers, eating implements, appear in slightly finer materials than poorer households might use: pewter rather than wooden plates, brass cooking pots rather than earthenware, glass drinking vessels for special occasions rather than exclusively wooden cups. These material gradations created visible distinction between social ranks while remaining within appropriate boundaries for non-noble households. Eleanor moves to a small chest in the corner of the hall, unlocking it with a key kept on the chain at her belt, a visible symbol of her household authority as keeper of family resources. Inside, more valuable possessions remain secured. Silver spoons that represent both practical eating implements and portable wealth easily transported during emergencies. A gilt-edged prayer book with simple illuminations, literacy and piety combined in physical form, small jewelry pieces appropriate for merchant status, and carefully preserved documents recording property ownership and business arrangements. These secured possessions represent both practical value and symbolic significance within medieval material hierarchy. Unlike land-based aristocratic wealth, merchant prosperity remained more portable and often concentrated in practical valuable objects rather than purely decorative displays. The careful storage and maintenance of these items reflects both their material worth and their role in establishing family identity and status within urban community networks. Consider how this material environment shaped medieval sensory experience and psychological relationship with possessions. In a world where each object represented significant human labor to produce, where replacement required substantial resource expenditure, people developed different emotional connections to material things than our modern consumer culture encourages. Objects accumulated history through generational use, repair showed care rather than inadequacy, and visible wear indicated valued utility rather than obsolescence requiring replacement. This fundamentally different material relationship created both greater attachment to fewer possessions and different aesthetic appreciation that valued durability and function alongside visual appeal. The built environment surrounding Eleanor similarly reflects medieval technological capabilities, resource limitations, and social organization. Her merchant family's multi-story townhouse represents successful urban adaptation to limited space within town walls, building vertically to maximize living and commercial space on narrow street frontage. The ground floor shop with living quarters above follows patterns repeated throughout medieval European towns, creating distinctive urban landscapes where work and domestic life occupied physically integrated rather than separated spaces. Construction materials and techniques visible throughout the house demonstrate sophisticated pre-industrial building knowledge. The ground floor's stone construction provides fire resistance for valuable merchandise storage, while upper floors utilize timber frame construction with wattle and daub infill, a technique balancing structural strength, insulation needs, and material availability. Interior walls feature lime wash finishes that brighten spaces while providing antimicrobial properties. Practical technology developed through observation rather than scientific understanding of microbial action. Natural light remains precious in medieval interiors, with window glass an expensive luxury even in prosperous merchant homes. Eleanor's house features small windows with oiled parchment coverings that admit diffused light while minimizing heat loss, a practical compromise between illumination and thermal efficiency. This limited natural lighting shaped daily rhythms, with work requiring visual precision clustered during daylight hours and activities possible in dimmer conditions reserved for evenings. Heating technology similarly influenced daily experience and household arrangement. The central hearth in Eleanor's hall provides both cooking facility and primary heat source, with smoke venting through a louvered opening in the roof, an arrangement requiring constant management to balance warmth and smoke reduction. Wealthier households like Eleanor's might supplement this central heating with charcoal braziers and sleeping chambers during coldest months, though fire safety concerns limited these secondary heat sources. Eleanor's ongoing material management extends to maintaining appropriate heat while minimizing fire risk, a constant calculation in timber-constructed towns where conflagration threatened entire communities. She instructs a servant about proper banking of coals for overnight heat preservation without dangerous flare-ups, demonstrating the everyday risk management that permeated medieval material existence long before formal risk assessment concepts existed. As you continue relaxing deeper into sleep, these explorations of medieval material culture are providing both interesting insights and peaceful transitions towards slumber. If you're enjoying this historical sleep journey, please consider liking this video to help others find our channel. Now let's explore how Eleanor navigates the complex religious landscape that structured medieval understanding of both everyday experiences and cosmic meaning. Medical crises and medieval healthcare solutions. While Eleanor has managed her household's routine health concerns with herbal remedies and preventative practices, medical emergencies required more dramatic interventions that reveal both the limitations and surprising sophistication of medieval healthcare approaches. Let us follow Eleanor through a medical crisis that tests both practical knowledge and spiritual resources in facing illness without modern medical understanding or technologies. The crisis begins unexpectedly during an otherwise ordinary afternoon. Eleanor's son Richard returns from the town square where he had been observing guild-sponsored games, supported by two older boys, his face pale and leg bleeding profusely from a significant wound. He had fallen against a market stall during the festivities, and a protruding nail had torn a deep gash along his thigh, an injury immediately recognizable as potentially life-threatening in an era before antibiotics and surgical sterilization. Eleanor's response demonstrates the decisive emergency management developed through necessity in medieval households. She immediately directs servants to position Richard on the kitchen table where better light allows wound examination, sends her daughter to fetch clean linen for bandaging, and dispatches another household member to locate either the local barber surgeon or bone setter, practitioners with experience in wound treatment beyond typical household capabilities. The wound itself presents immediate danger through blood loss, with longer-term risks of infection that medieval people recognized through observation, even without understanding bacterial causes. Eleanor's first intervention focuses on hemorrhage control, applying direct pressure with clean cloth while elevating the injured leg above heart level, techniques developed through generations of empirical observation rather than formal anatomical understanding. Medieval wound management reflected sophisticated practical knowledge despite lacking modern medical framework. Treatments often combined genuinely effective physical interventions with spiritual and magical elements now understood as psychologically comforting rather than physically therapeutic. This integrated approach addressed both physical injury and emotional trauma simultaneously, a holistic perspective sometimes lacking in modern compartmentalized medicine despite our superior technical capabilities. As bleeding slows under pressure, Eleanor carefully examines the wound edges. Drawing on knowledge passed through generations of women who managed household injuries, she recognizes the need for thorough cleaning before closure. She prepares a wound-washing solution of white wine vinegar diluted with boiled water, a genuinely antiseptic preparation developed through observation of improved outcomes rather than understanding of microbial contamination. The vinegar's acidity creates an environment hostile to bacteria, while the alcohol content provides additional antimicrobial effects. Science-based effectiveness discovered through practical experience. Richard endures this painful cleansing process with stoic determination expected of medieval boys. Eleanor speaks soothingly throughout, providing both practical instruction about remaining still and spiritual comfort through prayers to Saints Cosmas and Damian, patron saints of physicians and surgeons, whose intercession was believed particularly effective for wound healing. This simultaneous attention to physical and spiritual aspects of healing characterizes medieval healthcare's integrated approach to human suffering. The barber surgeon arrives, a middle-aged man named Walter who serves the town through multiple skilled services, including basic surgical procedures, tooth extraction, bloodletting, and indeed haircuts and beard trimming, as his title suggests. This integration of seemingly unrelated services made practical sense in medieval economic organization, with related skills involving sharp implements and steady hands clustered within single practitioners, despite their conceptual separation in modern healthcare specialization. Walter confirms Eleanor's initial wound management while preparing more specialized interventions. From his leather satchel, he produces needles and fine thread made from cleaned animal sinew for wound closure, surgical suturing being among the more sophisticated medical procedures available in medieval practice. Before beginning, he washes his hands thoroughly with vinegar solution, following practical hygiene procedures developed through observation rather than germ theory understanding. Consider the complex emotions Eleanor experiences watching her child undergo painful but necessary treatment without modern anesthesia or absolute confidence in outcomes. Medieval parenthood required particular psychological resilience in facing children's suffering with limited intervention options. The integration of spiritual practices with physical care provided essential psychological resources for both patients and caregivers navigating these difficult experiences, offering meaning and potential agency through prayer when material options reached clear limitations. The wound closure proceeds with Walter demonstrating considerable skill developed through practical experience rather than formal medical education. He places neat stitches to approximate wound edges while minimizing tissue damage, using techniques refined through generations of empirical observation. Eleanor assists throughout, holding Richard steady while offering both physical comfort and ongoing verbal reassurance, maternal care integrated with practical medical assistance in ways sometimes separated in modern clinical settings. With the wound closed, attention turns to preventing infection, the greatest ongoing danger in pre-antibiotic medicine. Walter prepares a poultice of honey mixed with crushed garlic for application over the stitched wound, a treatment combining multiple genuinely antimicrobial substances identified through observation despite lacking microbiological understanding. Honey's high sugar content creates osmotic pressure inhospitable to bacteria, while compounds in garlic provide additional antimicrobial effects. Science-based treatments discovered through careful observation of healing outcomes. The barber surgeon provides detailed instructions for ongoing wound management, keeping the area clean, changing dressings regularly, watching for signs of infection like increasing redness or warmth, and returning for stitch removal once healing progresses sufficiently. He also recommends dietary adjustments believed to support healing, increased consumption of broths and easily digested foods, addition of specific herbs thought to purify blood, and prohibition of foods considered harmful to wound recovery according to humoral medicine theories. As Walter departs after receiving appropriate payment for his services, Eleanor implements additional supportive measures drawing on household medical knowledge. She prepares willow bark tea to reduce pain and fever, a treatment containing salicylates similar to modern aspirin, and arranges Richard's sleeping position to elevate the wounded leg for continued swelling reduction. These ongoing care interventions demonstrate the comprehensive approach to injury management developed within medieval domestic healthcare. The medieval understanding of illness and injury operated through conceptual frameworks different from our modern biomedical model, yet contained genuine empirical wisdom. Humoral theory, positing that health required proper balance of 4 bodily fluids, blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile, provided coherent explanatory system that, while inaccurate in mechanism, often generated practically effective interventions through careful observation of outcomes. Treatments aimed at restoring perceived humoral imbalances sometimes produced genuine therapeutic benefits through mechanisms unknown to medieval practitioners, but validated by modern pharmacological understanding. Throughout the night, Eleanor maintains vigilant monitoring of Richard's condition, checking regularly for fever development that would indicate infection taking hold. She applies cold cloths to his forehead when slight temperature elevation appears, replaces the medicinal poultice as directed, and ensures regular small sips of liquid to prevent dehydration. This intensive nursing care, provided within domestic settings rather than medical institutions for most medieval patients, often proved as critical to recovery as the initial treatment interventions. By morning, Richard shows encouraging signs. Pain has diminished, no significant fever has developed, and the wound remains clean without excessive swelling or redness. Eleanor offers prayers of gratitude while maintaining practical vigilance, recognizing that several days of careful monitoring remain before confidence in recovery becomes reasonable. This balanced approach, acknowledging both divine influence and necessity for ongoing practical care, typifies medieval healthcare's integration of spiritual and material healing dimensions. I hope you're finding this exploration of medieval medical practices both interesting and conducive to peaceful rest. If you're enjoying this historical sleep journey, please consider subscribing to join our community of history lovers and peaceful sleepers. Now, let's explore how Eleanor's community navigates collective challenges through seasonal celebrations and community rituals that strengthen social bonds. Seasonal festivals and community rituals. The cycle of the medieval year provided structure and meaning through its rhythm of religious observances, agricultural transitions, and community celebrations. Let us follow Eleanor through a complete annual cycle, observing how seasonal festivals created both practical organization and symbolic meaning that connected individual experience to collective identity and cosmic understanding. The medieval year begins not on January 1st, as in our modern calendar, but with the first Sunday of Advent, the beginning of the liturgical year approximately 4 weeks before Christmas. For Eleanor and her community, this period initiates preparation for the midwinter celebration of Christ's birth, combining spiritual observance with practical adjustments to winter's deepening cold and diminishing light. Advent observances in Eleanor's household balance religious obligations with practical winter preparations. Special prayers and scripture readings mark spiritual preparation, while household activities focus on preserving food stores, completing winter clothing production, and securing adequate fuel before deepest winter limits these activities. This integration of practical necessity with spiritual observance characterizes the medieval sacred calendar, which aligned religious meaning with seasonal realities of agricultural and craft production cycles. The Christmas season, extending from Christmas Eve through Twelfth Night, January 6th, brings the year's most significant celebration during winter's darkest period. Eleanor's merchant household participates in both religious observances and community festivities appropriate to their social station. Church services with special music and decorations mark religious significance, while household celebrations include special foods preserved since autumn harvest specifically for this occasion. Medieval Christmas differed significantly from modern commercial celebrations while sharing certain core elements. Religious observance took priority over gift exchange, which played relatively minor role compared to contemporary practice. Community celebration emphasized shared feasting and performance traditions like mystery plays, rather than private family gatherings. The lengthy celebration period, 12 days rather than single holiday, created extended festive season that interrupted winter work patterns and provided psychological respite during challenging environmental conditions. For Eleanor's merchant household, Christmas feasting demonstrates appropriate prosperity without crossing into inappropriate ostentation for their social status. The Christmas dinner features special meats preserved from autumn slaughter, perhaps a small roast and game birds, supplemented with preserved fruits, nuts, and special bread made with expensive white flour and dried fruits. Wine rather than everyday ale accompanies the meal, while spiced honey cakes represent luxury appropriate for significant celebration. Beyond household celebration, Eleanor participates in community distributions to the parish poor, a Christmas obligation for prosperous families that combined religious charity requirements with practical social welfare. The Merchant Guild coordinates these distributions, with Eleanor contributing both prepared food and small money offerings appropriate to her family's means. These charitable practices reflect both genuine religious conviction regarding care for less fortunate and practical recognition that community stability required basic provision for vulnerable members. The celebration culminates on Twelfth Night, Epiphany, with final feasting before returning to normal winter work patterns. This transition marks the beginning of agricultural planning for the coming growing season, despite continuing winter conditions. For merchant households like Eleanor's, January brings inventory assessment, accounting reconciliation, and planning for spring trading opportunities when roads become passable after winter conditions improve. The late winter festival of Candlemas, February 2nd, marks both religious observance of Mary's purification after childbirth and practical midpoint of winter, when half the season's darkness has passed. Eleanor brings household candles to church for blessing. These blessed candles believed to provide both practical light and spiritual protection against winter dangers. The festival's focus on purification extends to household activities, with Eleanor overseeing deep cleaning of winter accumulations in preparation for eventual spring. Consider how these calendar-structured activities connected medieval people to natural cycles, often obscured in our electrically illuminated, climate-controlled modern environments. The physical experience of winter darkness relieved by gradually lengthening days after solstice, the bodily sensation of cold mitigated through communal celebration that provided both psychological and literal warmth. The shared anticipation of spring's renewal, expressed through ritual practices, these created embodied connection to seasonal rhythms that modern people might experience more abstractly than viscerally. As February transitions toward early spring, the community prepares for Lenten observance, the 40-day period of fasting and spiritual reflection preceding Easter. For Eleanor's household, practical preparations include using remaining winter stores of butter, eggs, and meat before the Lenten prohibition on animal products begins on Ash Wednesday. Shrove Tuesday, known in some regions as Mardi Gras or Carnival, brings community celebration with pancakes and fritters using these ingredients before the fasting period commences. Lenten observance transforms Eleanor's household management and cooking practices. Meals shift to fish, legumes, grains, and vegetables without animal fats, a significant dietary change requiring alternative cooking techniques and flavor profiles. This religious obligation coincides with practical reality of diminishing winter food stores before spring production begins, demonstrating again how medieval religious calendars aligned spiritual practice with agricultural necessity in mutually reinforcing patterns. The somber Lenten period concludes with Holy Week observances, culminating in Easter celebration, Christianity's most significant feast marking Christ's resurrection. Eleanor's household participates in elaborate liturgical observances, beginning with Palm Sunday processions and continuing through increasingly solemn Holy Thursday and Good Friday services before Easter's joyful celebration. These rituals engage participants through multisensory experiences, visual spectacle, music, procession, and symbolic actions, creating immersive spiritual experience fundamentally different from purely intellectual religious engagement. Easter's arrival brings both spiritual celebration and practical transition to spring activities. Eleanor's household enjoys foods prohibited during Lent. The Easter feast, featuring early spring lamb if available, fresh bread, and perhaps precious sugar confections for special celebration. Symbolically, the feast represents both religious resurrection and natural renewal as growing season begins, connecting spiritual narrative with visible environmental transformation in meaningful convergence. The spring agricultural season brings distinctive festivals combining practical work coordination with religious blessing. Rogation Days, the 3 days before Ascension Thursday in April or May, feature processions around parish boundaries for blessing fields and crops. These ceremonies served multiple functions beyond religious symbolism, physically marking community boundaries for new generations, identifying needed repair to field enclosures, and coordinating agricultural labor through community-wide participation. This integration of practical administration with spiritual significance characterizes many medieval observances that modern perspective might artificially separate into secular and religious categories. For Eleanor's merchant household, spring brings renewed trading opportunities as improved weather conditions make travel possible. Thomas prepares for the first significant trading journey since winter's restrictions, while Eleanor oversees household transition to spring activities, cleaning winter accumulations, airing textiles stored during damp months, and preparing garden spaces for planting. These practical activities intertwine with religious observance through blessing of seeds before planting and special prayers for successful trading ventures. The May Day celebration brings community festivities welcoming full spring after winter's challenges. Eleanor and her family join neighbors in decorating the town square with spring flowers, participating in maypole dances, and enjoying outdoor meals that strengthen community bonds strained by winter's confinement. While church authorities sometimes viewed these celebrations suspiciously for potentially pagan origins, communities maintain them as essential expressions of collective joy and natural renewal celebration. Summer solstice brings the feast of Saint Nithifrara John the Baptist, June 24th, marking the year's longest day with bonfires and community gatherings. These celebrations combine Christian observance with pre-Christian solstice traditions in syncretic practices characteristic of medieval religious expression. For Eleanor's community, practical benefits include protection against perceived supernatural dangers, believed stronger during solstice transition, and opportunity for community bonding through shared ritual experience. The high summer period brings intensive agricultural labor for rural communities, with merchant households like Eleanor's participating in urban aspects of this seasonal work. Market activities intensify as produce becomes available, requiring additional household labor for preserving seasonal abundance through drying, pickling, and storage preparations. Eleanor coordinates these preservation activities alongside normal household management, building stores for winter months while fresh produce remains available. Imagine experiencing these seasonal transitions without modern conveniences that separate us from natural cycles. No electric lights to extend day during winter's darkness, no refrigeration to preserve summer abundance indefinitely, no climate control to moderate seasonal temperature extremes. The medieval relationship with seasonal change necessarily engaged body and spirit directly in environmental realities we often experience at comfortable remove. This embodied participation in natural cycles created different temporal experience, both more connected to environmental rhythms and more socially synchronized through collective adaptation to shared conditions. The late summer harvest season brings Lammas celebration, August 1st, marking the beginning of grain harvest with special bread baked from the first wheat. Though primarily agricultural in focus, urban households like Eleanor's participate through market activities, ritual bread sharing, and community celebration, acknowledging this critical annual transition. For merchant families, this period brings opportunities for trading agricultural products between regions with different harvest timings, creating commercial opportunities aligned with seasonal production patterns. Autumn's arrival brings the most labor-intensive preservation activities, as final harvests require processing for winter storage. Eleanor oversees household production of preserved fruits, vegetables, stored in sand or salt, smoked and salted meats from autumn butchering, and dried herbs for both culinary and medicinal winter use. These activities represent significant household production requiring coordination of servant labor, specialized knowledge of preservation techniques, and careful resource allocation for winter security. The medieval year concludes with harvest completion celebrations culminating in All Saints' Day, November 1st, and All Souls' Day, November 2nd, festivals honoring departed saints and community members that coincide with final agricultural closure before winter's dormancy. Eleanor's household participates in both religious observances for family ancestors and community celebrations marking successful completion of the agricultural cycle. These observances provide psychological closure to the productive season while preparing for winter's inward focus on household activities and spiritual reflection. As you drift deeper towards sleep, I hope these explorations of medieval seasonal cycles are providing both interesting insights and peaceful transitions. If you're enjoying this historical sleep journey, please consider subscribing to our channel for more soothing historical content. Now, let's explore how Eleanor navigates the challenges of maintaining household security in a world without modern protective institutions. Law, justice, and community order in the medieval town. Eleanor's experiences of security, justice, and social order differ fundamentally from modern expectations of professional law enforcement and institutional legal systems. Let us explore how medieval communities maintained social stability through overlapping systems of community surveillance, collective responsibility, theft, and multi-layered jurisdictional authorities that together created functional order without centralized police forces or standardized legal codes. Morning activity in Eleanor's household is interrupted by urgent knocking at the street door. A neighbor brings concerning news. Overnight theft occurred at a nearby merchant's shop with valuable trade goods stolen while the family slept above. This incident activates immediate community response, very different from modern expectations of reporting to professional authorities and awaiting their investigation. Instead, the merchant community mobilizes collective action to address both immediate security concerns and pursuit of missing goods. Thomas immediately joins other guild members gathering to discuss the situation, while Eleanor takes charge of enhanced household security measures. She instructs servants about additional door-bearing procedures, secures valuable items in hidden storage areas, and arranges modified sleeping arrangements with male servants positioned near vulnerable entry points. These rapid adaptations reflect medieval security's reliance on household self-protection rather than external protective services. The Merchant Guild's response demonstrates medieval community policing through collective responsibility structures. Guild members organize search parties to visit known resale locations where stolen goods might appear. contact associates in neighboring towns to watch for suspicious merchandise, and gather information about strangers recently observed in the neighborhood. This distributed surveillance network compensates for absence of professional investigators through community knowledge activation. Medieval justice operated through overlapping jurisdictional systems rather than unified legal authority. Town charters typically granted urban centers certain judicial independence from manorial courts governing rural areas. Guild organizations maintained internal discipline over members through their own regulations. Religious courts handled matters involving clerics or spiritual concerns. Royal courts intervened in serious matters or cases involving multiple jurisdictions. This complex jurisdictional landscape created both challenges and opportunities for medieval people navigating justice systems. By midday, Thomas returns with news that town officials have been formally notified about the theft. The town bailiff, an official responsible for executing legal decisions rather than investigating crimes, has recorded the incident and contacted the mayor, who may convene the town court to address the matter if suspects are identified. This official response works alongside rather than replacing the community-initiated investigation already underway through guild networks. Eleanor's household security precautions continue alongside normal activities, demonstrating how medieval life incorporated threat awareness into daily routines rather than depending on external protection. Young Richard is instructed to remain within the household rather than playing in the town square as planned. Delivery of goods occurs through the shop's front entrance rather than rear delivery door to maintain visibility. Valuable merchandise receives additional securing beyond normal practices. These adaptations reflect security through behavior modification rather than physical or technological safeguards. By afternoon, the distributed community investigation yields results that highlight medieval justice's reliance on public knowledge networks rather than forensic evidence. A cooperator's apprentice reports seeing unfamiliar men loading bundled merchandise onto a cart near the town's eastern gate before dawn. The town gatekeeper confirms allowing a merchant cart to depart early, having recognized the driver as a regular trader but not inspecting companions or cargo, a security weakness immediately addressed through modified gate procedures, requiring more thorough inspection regardless of traveler familiarity. This information activates the next level of medieval justice mechanisms. The town's mounted watchmen, part-time security officials rather than professional law enforcement, prepare to pursue the suspected thieves along likely travel routes. Simultaneously, messengers are dispatched to neighboring towns within a day's travel distance, alerting their officials to watch for suspicious merchants attempting to sell goods matching the stolen inventory. This regional security cooperation provided essential extension of local authority in the absence of centralized law enforcement. Consider how this security approach differs from modern expectations of professional specialization and institutional responsibility. Medieval community safety depended on mutually reinforcing social behaviors rather than delegated protection, neighbors watching for unusual activity, merchants recognizing inventory origins, travelers reporting suspicious encounters on roads. This distributed responsibility created different psychological relationship with security, a collective achievement requiring active participation rather than service purchased through taxation and delivered by specialists. As evening approaches, Eleanor and Thomas receive news through guild connections that suspected thieves have been detained in a neighboring market town attempting to sell goods matching the stolen description. This development activates formal judicial processes that reveal medieval law's procedure-focused approach to determining guilt and assigning punishment. The accused will face public hearing before local officials, with judgment significantly influenced by their social standing, community reputation, and ability to produce character witnesses, factors holding greater weight than physical evidence in medieval judicial thinking. Eleanor and Thomas discuss whether Thomas should travel as witness in the eventual proceedings, a significant time commitment given medieval legal processes' deliberate pace. Unlike modern expectations of swift justice, medieval proceedings might extend weeks or months, particularly when involving multiple jurisdictions, as in this case. The theft occurred in one town while apprehension happened in another, creating jurisdictional questions requiring negotiation between town authorities or appeal to higher county or royal officials, depending on value of stolen goods. That evening, additional guild members visit to discuss broader security implications and potential regulatory changes in response to the theft. Medieval governance frequently adapted through reactive regulation rather than preventative planning, addressing specific incidents with targeted rules rather than developing comprehensive systems. The merchants consider proposals for coordinated night watches during major trading periods, shared funding for additional town gate guards, and stricter verification requirements for merchants transporting goods between communities. Eleanor contributes practical perspectives to this discussion from her household management experience. She suggests coordination of delivery schedules to ensure multiple households receive goods simultaneously, creating safety through collective presence. She recommends modified storage practices, dispersing valuable inventory among multiple locations rather than concentrated storage. She proposes household servant coordination for overlapping night monitoring. These suggestions reflect medieval security's integration of domestic and commercial concerns rather than their separation in modern conceptualization. Medieval punishment philosophy differed fundamentally from modern rehabilitation concepts, focusing instead on public demonstration of consequences, compensation for victims, and restoration of communal order. Punishments varied dramatically based on social status, with nobility facing different consequences than commoners for identical offenses. Property crimes like theft typically resulted in corporal punishment, public whipping or mutilation, compensation requirements, banishment from the community, or execution for repeat offenders or cases involving violence. This punishment severity reflected both religious concepts of justice and practical deterrence in societies lacking incarceration infrastructure. Over subsequent days, Eleanor observes how the theft incident strengthens community bonds through shared response to perceived external threat. Neighbors establish informal notification systems for unusual activities, coordinate overlapping travel to increase group safety, and share security innovations developed by individual households. This collective adaptation demonstrates medieval communities' resilience through social cohesion rather than technological or institutional protection, creating security through relationship networks rather than protective barriers or enforcement specialists. The incident resolution comes 2 weeks later when Thomas returns from attending judicial proceedings in the neighboring town. The accused thieves, confirmed as outsiders rather than community members, received severe corporal punishment before being banished from the region with formal notification to surrounding communities, preventing their settlement elsewhere nearby. The stolen merchandise, recovered mostly intact, returns to its rightful owner with formal ceremony, emphasizing restoration of proper ownership and commercial order. If you're finding this exploration of medieval justice and security systems interesting as you drift towards sleep, please consider sharing our channel with friends who appreciate both historical insight and peaceful sleep content. Now, let's explore how Eleanor and her family participate in the vibrant urban culture of their medieval town through entertainment, art, and social gatherings that provided meaning and connection beyond daily responsibilities. Medieval trade networks and economic systems. The rhythms of Eleanor's life intertwine inseparably with the complex trade systems that create both her family's livelihood and the interconnected economic networks structuring medieval urban experience. Let us explore how commerce functioned in a world without banks, corporations, digital transactions, or instant communication, revealing sophisticated economic adaptations that enabled trade across vast distances, despite technological limitations we might consider prohibitive. Eleanor's day begins with commercial correspondence as a messenger delivers a sealed letter from a trading partner in a Flemish cloth-making town over 100 miles distant. This communication, having traveled for nearly 2 weeks by various couriers, contains critical information about cloth availability, quality variations in recent shipments, and price fluctuations affecting Thomas's potential orders. The significant time delay between information dispatch and receipt, a fundamental constraint of medieval commerce, required different strategic planning than our instantaneous modern communications permit. After reviewing the letter contents with Thomas, Eleanor updates the household's commercial ledger, a bound volume containing records of outstanding accounts, inventory, and financial obligations that serves as the medieval merchant's primary business tracking system. Her neat handwriting in iron gall ink records both concrete transactions and provisional plans based on the newly received information. This physical documentation system, while primitive by modern standards, represented sophisticated information management, adapted to medieval technological constraints. Medieval commerce operated through fascinatingly different mechanisms than modern capitalism, while achieving surprisingly similar functions. Without banks in the modern sense, merchants developed complex credit networks through personal relationships and documented obligations. Without corporations or limited liability, they created risk-sharing partnerships dissolved and reformed for specific ventures. Without standardized currencies, they employed money changers and developed sophisticated exchange rate knowledge. These adaptations demonstrate remarkable economic innovation within constraints modern observers might consider prohibitive to complex commerce. Mid-morning finds Eleanor attending to inventory management as a shipment arrives at the family shop. Wool of varying grades purchased from regional producers for eventual resale to cloth manufacturers. Her assessment of quality demonstrates sophisticated commodity knowledge developed through years of practical experience rather than formal training. She sorts incoming wool by fiber length, cleanliness, and texture, characteristics determining both appropriate pricing and potential markets among different cloth producers requiring varying raw material qualities. This inventory processing reveals the medieval textile trade's complex production chains, connecting rural agricultural producers through multiple commercial intermediaries to manufacturing centers and ultimately to consumers across widespread regions. Eleanor and Thomas occupy the critical middle position in this production sequence, consolidating small producers' output into commercially viable quantities while grading and sorting materials to meet specialized manufacturing requirements in distant locations. This intermediary role required deep knowledge of both agricultural production realities and manufacturing needs, created value through expertise rather than simply transporting goods. By midday, Eleanor shifts attention to financial matters as a local customer arrives to settle an outstanding account. Rather than cash payment, he brings a combination of silver objects, cups of standard weight, and a written obligation from another merchant owing him payment. This transaction demonstrates medieval commerce's sophisticated credit systems operating through transferable debt obligations and commodity money rather than standardized currency, creating liquidity despite limited physical coin availability. Eleanor carefully weighs the silver using the shop's balance scales and officially stamped weights, tools regulated by town authorities to ensure fair measurement critical to commercial trust. She then records both the partial silver payment and the transferred debt obligation in the ledger, calculating remaining balance using Roman numerals, the standard mathematical notation for European commerce, despite their cumbersome calculation properties. This transaction illustrates how medieval merchants developed practical computational methods despite lacking convenient decimal systems or standardized currencies. Consider how this commercial environment required different mental frameworks than our modern economic expectations. Without banking institutions providing financial intermediation, medieval merchants essentially functioned as their own banks, extending credit, assessing counterparty risk, managing currency conversion, and maintaining liquidity through sophisticated debt networks. The personal nature of these arrangements created business relationships fundamentally different from modern anonymous transactions, commercial trust emerging through reputation, family connection, and community standing, rather than institutional guarantees or regulatory oversight. Afternoon brings strategic planning as Thomas and Eleanor discuss upcoming trading opportunities presented by the spring fair in a neighboring town. Unlike modern continuous markets, medieval commerce concentrated significant transaction volume in periodic fairs, temporary gatherings where merchants from widespread regions conducted bulk trades, settled accounts, and exchanged commercial information. Preparing for these critical events required careful inventory planning, strategic credit extension or collection, and logistics coordination, significantly more complex than everyday local business. Eleanor's role in fair preparation demonstrates medieval merchant wives' substantial business involvement beyond mere household management. She reviews inventory records to identify optimal quantities for transport given limited wagon capacity, analyzes outstanding customer obligations to prioritize collection before the fair, and develops pricing strategies based on known competition likely to attend. This sophisticated business planning belies simplistic historical views of medieval women as economically marginalized, revealing instead their essential participation in commercial decision-making within family enterprises. The practical logistics of fair participation highlight medieval trade's physical challenges alongside its financial complexities. Eleanor supervises packing arrangements for goods to be transported, wool bales requiring protection from moisture, finished textiles needing careful folding to prevent damage, and smaller valuable items secured in locked containers. She arranges for hired guards to accompany the valuable shipment, schedules optimal departure timing to reach the fair location during daylight hours, and prepares travel provisions for Thomas and the accompanying apprentices. These preparations reveal medieval commerce's indivisibility from physical transportation challenges that modern supply chain management has largely rendered invisible to business owners. Every commercial transaction ultimately depended on physical movement of goods through environments with significant safety risks, infrastructure limitations, and unpredictable delays. Successful merchants developed sophisticated risk management strategies addressing these physical vulnerabilities alongside financial considerations. Seasonal planning, security arrangements, and connectivity to information networks provided critical competitive advantages. Medieval economic systems operated through fundamentally different organizational principles than modern capitalism, despite surface similarities in commercial activities. Guild regulations limited competition through production standards and market access restrictions, while simultaneously providing quality guarantees for consumers and security for producers. Lending against interest, usury, faced religious prohibition that created elaborate workarounds through partnership structures, exchange rate manipulations, and risk premium arrangements. Community economic ethics emphasized fair pricing and just profit rather than pure market determination. These structural differences created commercial environments balancing competition with security, innovation with stability in ways distinctly different from modern economic organization. Evening brings neighborhood merchants visiting to exchange commercial news and coordinate regional trading strategies, an information sharing practice that seems contradictory to modern competitive assumptions, but made perfect sense within medieval economic frameworks. Eleanor serves refreshments while participating fully in business discussions. Her knowledge of inventory, pricing trends, and creditworthiness of various customers respected by male merchants due to its practical value despite gender constraints in other contexts. The conversations reveal sophisticated coordination of complementary commercial activities rather than pure competition. One merchant's upcoming journey to a distant trading center creates opportunity for others to send small shipments or letters without dedicated travel costs. Information about regional production problems, crop failures, manufacturing disruptions, transportation difficulties, benefits all through improved planning rather than creating competitive advantage through information asymmetry. This collaborative competitive balance reflected medieval understanding of commerce as serving community needs rather than purely individual profit maximization. Before retiring, Eleanor makes final entries in household accounts that reveal medieval family businesses' integration of commercial and domestic finances. Unlike modern separation between business and personal financial management, medieval merchants typically maintained unified accounting of all resources regardless of purpose. Eleanor records both business expenditures for inventory and household expenses for food within the same ledger system, managing total family resources as unified entity rather than distinguishing between commercial and personal categories. This integrated financial management reflected medieval economic understanding of the household as primary production unit rather than modern conception of business entities separate from family structures. The merchant family business represented inseparable extension of household, rather than distinct institutional arrangement. Commercial premises physically connected to living quarters, apprentices integrated into family meal structures, business reputation inseparable from family honor. This integration created different risk profiles, management approaches, and strategic timeframes than modern business organizations operating independently from owner households. I hope these explorations of medieval economic systems are proving both informative and conducive to peaceful rest as you drift towards sleep. If you're enjoying this historical sleep journey, please tap the like button with a drowsy finger. Now let's explore how Eleanor experiences the physical environment of her medieval town. The sights, sounds, and sensations that created urban experience fundamentally different from modern city life. Politics, power, and social hierarchy. The structure of power and authority shaping Eleanor's world differs fundamentally from modern political arrangements. Let us explore the overlapping jurisdictions, personal allegiances, and status distinctions that created medieval governance without centralized bureaucracy or clear institutional boundaries between religious, economic, and political power spheres. Eleanor's morning activities are interrupted by the town crier's arrival in the market square, announcing upcoming visitation by a royal tax assessor. This news activates multiple governance layers that will respond according to their separate interests and authorities. The town council must prepare documentation justifying current tax rates under the town charter. The Merchant Guild will organize presentation of commerce volume supporting specific tax exemptions. Individual households must gather proof of previous payments and prepare for potential reassessment. Thomas immediately departs for an emergency guild meeting to coordinate merchant response, while Eleanor begins household preparation by retrieving tax documentation from previous years, receipts and official seals proving payment history that provide essential protection against double taxation or unjustified increases. This preparation demonstrates medieval governance's documentation focus despite limited literacy, with official seals and physical tokens often serving functions later transferred to written records in more text-based administrative systems. Medieval political authority operated through fascinatingly different mechanisms than modern governance. Power flowed from personal relationships rather than institutional offices, making individual connections to powerful figures often more significant than formal positions. Authority derived from multiple overlapping sources: royal grants, church appointments, traditional rights, guild regulations, creating complex jurisdictional landscapes requiring sophisticated navigation. Status derived more from publicly acknowledged social position than economic measures alone, with honor and reputation comprising essential political capital alongside material wealth. By midday, Eleanor receives visit from the mayor's wife, a social call carrying significant political implications despite its informal appearance. Medieval governance operated partly through these network relationships between households rather than solely through official channels, with women playing crucial connector roles despite formal exclusion from most governance positions. The visitor brings both social news and subtle political information about town council deliberations that might affect merchant interests, intelligence Thomas cannot access directly through formal channels, but which significantly influences family business decisions. Eleanor serves refreshments while engaging in conversation that moves smoothly between household matters and topics with significant political implications. They discuss children's development alongside potential marriage connections between families that would strengthen political alliances. They share household management challenges alongside insights about which guild leaders hold stronger influence with visiting royal officials. This seamless integration of domestic and political concerns reflects medieval governance's operation through family networks rather than separated public institutions. The visitor mentions plans for the upcoming Corpus Christi procession, an annual religious festival with significant political dimensions, as participants' position in the procession visibly displayed their relative status within community hierarchy. Eleanor makes notes after the visit regarding necessary preparations for her family's participation, understanding that appropriate display during this civic religious event directly impacts their political standing and business opportunities throughout the coming year. This integration of religious observance, political demonstration, and economic advantage typifies medieval governance's multidimensional nature. Consider how this political environment required different skills than modern democratic systems. Success depended less on persuading masses of voters than navigating complex personal relationships with key power holders. Influence operated through reciprocal obligation networks rather than campaign contributions or public advocacy. Information moved through personal connections rather than media channels. These differences created political landscapes where family reputation, generational relationships, and personal honor constituted essential political resources alongside material wealth and formal positions. Afternoon finds Eleanor reviewing household accounts with particular attention to charitable distributions that serve both religious obligations and political positioning. Medieval governance operated partially through demonstrated generosity that established both divine favor and community influence. She allocates funds for regular contributions to parish poor relief, occasional larger donations for church building projects, and strategic gifts supporting guild charitable activities. These distributions reflect sophisticated understanding of how generosity simultaneously fulfilled religious requirements, demonstrated appropriate prosperity, and created political influence through recipient obligation. Eleanor's charitable management reveals medieval society's different understanding of wealth's purpose compared to modern accumulation or consumption focus. Prosperity carried moral obligations for distribution alongside privileges of heightened consumption. Merchant families like Eleanor's navigated careful balance between appropriate display of God-granted success and inappropriate ostentation, risking both moral condemnation and political disadvantage through status-inappropriate presentation. This balance required constant calibration against changing standards and family-specific circumstances, rather than following universal guidelines. As evening approaches, Thomas returns with news from the guild meeting that illuminates medieval political action's consensus-oriented nature. Rather than majority rule voting or executive decision, the merchants reached collective position through extended discussion aimed at unanimous agreement. This process prioritized group cohesion and presentation of unified front to external authorities over speed or individual preference expression. The resulting political strategy emphasizes documented precedent and charter rights rather than abstract arguments or economic efficiency claims, reflecting medieval political thought's foundation in established custom rather than innovation or optimized outcomes. The evening meal includes hosting a distant cousin newly appointed to minor position in the bishop's household administration, a connection with significant political implications given the church's substantial governance role. Medieval authority derived not from clean separation of institutional powers, but their overlapping jurisdictions, with religious offices carrying substantial secular authority alongside spiritual responsibilities. Cultivating relationships across these governance spheres provided essential political insurance against adverse decisions from any single authority source. Medieval social hierarchy operated through complex status distinctions more nuanced than simplified three-estate model, those who pray, fight, and work, often presented in basic historical overviews. Within the third estate of non-noble, non-clerical people, significant gradations existed between wealthy urban merchants, master craftsmen, general shopkeepers, skilled laborers, unskilled workers, and urban poor. Each level maintained distinct privileges, obligations, dress expectations, and behavioral codes, creating visible status markers throughout daily interactions. This elaborated hierarchy created both security through defined social position and continuous status anxiety, as families sought advantage through incremental upward movement within established categories rather than revolutionary rejection of the hierarchical system itself. Before retiring, Eleanor and Thomas discussed their son's future prospects, a conversation revealing medieval social mobility's distinctive patterns operating through intergenerational planning rather than individual achievement focus. They consider potential apprenticeship placement with a more prestigious merchant specializing in higher value imports, a strategic advancement from their current wool trade that would elevate family status while building on established commercial foundation rather than entering an entirely different social category through radical position change. This conversation demonstrates medieval social advancement's gradualist nature, typically occurring through small intergenerational steps, rather than dramatic individual status transformation. A successful merchant family might hope their grandchildren could enter minor gentry through cumulative advancement over decades, rather than expecting immediate access to dramatically higher status regardless of achievement. This long-term perspective created different ambition patterns than modern expectations of individual social mobility within single lifespans. Their discussion includes possibility of eventually purchasing small agricultural property outside town, not as primary income source, but as symbolic connection to land-based status that remains medieval society's fundamental prestige marker despite urban wealth's growing importance. This aspiration reveals persistent hierarchical values, despite economic changes gradually undermining traditional status arrangements. Even successful urban merchants internalized cultural values privileging land ownership and gentle status over commercial wealth, seeking to translate mercantile success into traditional prestige markers, rather than asserting alternative value systems elevating commercial achievement itself. As you drift deeper towards sleep, I hope these explorations of medieval political structures are proving both intellectually interesting and physically relaxing. If you're finding value in this historical sleep journey, please consider subscribing to join our community of history enthusiasts seeking peaceful rest through fascinating historical narratives. Now let's explore how Eleanor's inner experiences, her spiritual understanding, emotional life, and personal identity developed within medieval cultural frameworks fundamentally different from modern psychological assumptions. Art, music, and recreation in medieval life. The aesthetic and recreational dimensions of Eleanor's world offer fascinating insights into how medieval people found beauty, pleasure, and relaxation without modern entertainment technologies or contemporary artistic concepts. Let us explore the creative expressions, leisure activities, and sensory pleasures that provided medieval people meaningful respite from work and connected them to beauty despite material constraints we might consider severely limiting. The sounds of a traveling minstrel performing in the town square draw Eleanor to her window, providing welcome diversion from household accounts. Medieval urban environments featured periodic entertainment by itinerant performers, bringing music, stories, and news from distant locations, creating temporary festive atmosphere within ordinary workdays. The performers' repertoire blends religious songs, heroic ballads, humorous tales, and news accounts set to memorable melodies. Entertainment simultaneously providing information, moral instruction, and aesthetic pleasure rather than serving purely recreational function. Eleanor pauses her work to listen while completing simple mending, demonstrating how medieval leisure often occurred alongside productive activity rather than as completely separate time category. Unlike modern sharp delineation between work and leisure hours, medieval recreation frequently interwove with necessary tasks, creating complementary rather than opposing life domains. Pleasure came through enhanced ordinary experience rather than escaped from daily responsibilities into separate entertainment spaces. Medieval aesthetic sensibilities differed fundamentally from modern artistic values, employing different evaluative criteria and purposes for creative expression. Visual arts served primarily devotional and instructional purposes, rather than personal expression or abstract exploration. Music functioned as worship enhancement, community bonding activity, and work rhythm regulation alongside entertainment. Literature prioritized moral instruction and cultural preservation over innovation or psychological exploration. These functional integrations created different relationships between creativity, daily life, and social purpose than modern arts often separated cultural position. After enjoying several musical pieces, Eleanor sends her daughter with a small coin offering for the performer, combining entertainment patronage with charitable giving in characteristic medieval integration of economic, social, and cultural functions. She then suggests Catherine might practice her own simple harp playing this evening, revealing how musical creation extended beyond professional performers into household recreation. Unlike modern consumer relationship with professionally produced entertainment, medieval households actively produced their own music, storytelling, and visual decoration as ordinary domestic activities rather than specialized artistic pursuits. Midday brings different recreational opportunity as Eleanor takes brief respite from responsibilities by walking to the parish church garden, a space serving multiple community functions including aesthetic pleasure. Medieval gardens blended practical and beautiful elements without modern separation between productive and ornamental growing spaces. Medicinal herbs, culinary plants, and beautiful flowers grew alongside each other, creating environments simultaneously useful and aesthetically pleasing in characteristic medieval functional integration. Eleanor sits briefly on a stone bench, enjoying visual pleasure of early blooms, while mentally reciting prayers associated with different flowering plants. This garden experience demonstrates medieval aesthetic appreciation's frequent religious framing, beauty understood as divine creation reflecting God's perfection rather than purely sensory experience or human artistic achievement. The flowers' colors, forms, and fragrances offer both immediate sensory pleasure and symbolic spiritual meaning in characteristic medieval layered experience connecting material and divine realms. Consider how this integrated aesthetic experience differs from our modern compartmentalization of beauty, function, and meaning. Medieval people encountered symbolic significance embedded within sensory experiences we might perceive as purely physical. A rose provided simultaneous sensory pleasure through color and fragrance, practical value as medicinal ingredient, and spiritual meaning through association with the Virgin Mary. This layered perception created richer engagement with fewer material objects than our often single-dimensional interactions with more abundant possessions. Depth of meaning compensating for material limitations in ways modern affluence doesn't necessarily replicate. Returning home, Eleanor passes through the town center where men play a casual game of quoits, a ring-tossing competition requiring skill, providing social connection, and offering moderate physical exercise. Medieval recreation often featured such simple competitive activities requiring minimal equipment while building community bonds through shared experience. Unlike modern sports with extensive specialized equipment and formal organization, medieval games typically utilized readily available objects, adaptable rules, and inclusive participation structures integrated into community spaces rather than separate recreational facilities. Eleanor observes the game briefly before continuing homeward, noting how these informal recreational activities create community connections across occupational boundaries. Merchants, craftsmen, and laborers temporarily sharing common experience despite their different social positions. While medieval society maintained strict status distinctions in formal contexts, recreational activities sometimes created temporary spaces of reduced social distance through shared physical experience and good-natured competition that built community cohesion alongside providing individual pleasure. The evening brings household-centered recreation as family members gather after dinner in the hall. Thomas reads aloud from a borrowed book of saints' lives, a valued entertainment combining religious edification with narrative pleasure. Medieval literacy often operated through such shared reading experiences rather than silent individual consumption, creating communal interpretation and discussion rather than private engagement with texts. This practice developed active listening skills and memory retention, different from modern reading habits, oriented toward individual silent processing. Following the reading, Catherine demonstrates her progress on the small harp while Richard practices simple wooden flute, household musical creation representing typical medieval family recreation. Unlike modern households primarily consuming professionally created entertainment through technological devices, medieval families regularly produced their own music, storytelling, handcrafts, and games as ordinary evening activities. This participatory entertainment culture developed different creative relationships than modern consumer orientations toward professional performance standards. Seasonal recreational patterns structured the medieval year alongside work rhythms and religious observances. Eleanor and Thomas discuss upcoming Whitsuntide celebrations that will feature community-wide games, special foods, and brief suspension of ordinary work patterns. These periodic festivals provided essential psychological refreshment within the demanding medieval work calendar, creating anticipated moments of heightened pleasure that sustained community morale through difficult agricultural and manufacturing labor cycles. Medieval visual aesthetics prioritized different values than modern artistic preferences. Where contemporary taste often values innovation, individual expression, and challenging conventions, medieval aesthetics emphasized harmony, proper proportion, technical perfection, and adherence to established conventions believed to reflect divine order. Beauty emerged through perfected execution of known forms rather than novel personal expression, creating different creative goals than modern artistic individualism. These aesthetic values appeared consistently across architecture, manuscript illumination, textile decoration, and other creative forms, reflecting coherent philosophical understanding of beauty's relationship to cosmic order rather than individual emotional expression. Before retiring, Eleanor engages in her own preferred recreational handcraft, embroidery, combining practical household enhancement with creative pleasure. Her current project, decorative border for a church altar cloth, demonstrates characteristic medieval integration of devotional purpose, community contribution, and personal creative satisfaction. The flowing vine pattern with symbolic flowers represents hours of evening work spread over months, proceeding without artificial lighting that would strain eyes and waste expensive candles. This patient, incremental creative process developed different aesthetic relationship than modern expectations of rapid project completion. Tomorrow will bring similar moments of aesthetic pleasure and recreational respite integrated throughout ordinary responsibilities rather than segregated into designated leisure time. Eleanor will likely sing work songs while supervising household tasks, appreciate liturgical music during church attendance, exchange humorous stories with other merchant wives during shared textile work, and perhaps enjoy brief board game with family during evening hours. This dispersed, integrated pattern of aesthetic and recreational experience created different pleasure rhythms than modern concentrated entertainment experiences or designated leisure hours. I hope these explorations of medieval recreation and aesthetic experience are providing both interesting insights and peaceful transitions towards sleep. If you're enjoying this historical journey, please consider liking this video to help others find our channel. Now, let's explore Eleanor's final reflection on her place within medieval society as our journey through her daily experiences draws toward conclusion. Inner life, faith, emotion, and personal identity. As we draw our historical journey to a close, let us explore perhaps the most fascinating yet elusive aspect of Eleanor's medieval experience. Her inner life of faith, emotion, and personal identity developed within cultural frameworks fundamentally different from modern psychological understanding. While external behaviors remain accessible through historical records, the subjective experiences of medieval people require careful reconstruction that balances recognizing shared human emotional capacities with respecting authentic differences in psychological organization across historical periods. Eleanor wakes before dawn to the sound of church bells calling the faithful to prime, the first canonical hour marking morning prayer. Her immediate thoughts form wordless devotion, reflexive prayer integrated into ordinary consciousness rather than separated religious activity. This seamless integration of spiritual awareness within everyday mental patterns represents fundamental difference from modern compartmentalized religious experience, often confined to designated worship times or spaces. Eleanor's medieval mind perceives divine presence as constant environmental reality rather than periodic focus of attention or matter of abstract belief. Her morning devotional reading from a small prayer book demonstrates medieval spirituality's textual aspect despite limited literacy rates. For privileged women like Eleanor, with basic reading skills, personal devotional texts provided spiritual guidance supplementing communal worship. The book's illustrated pages support meditation through visual elements reinforcing textual meanings, text and image working together to create multimodal spiritual experience rather than purely intellectual engagement with abstract concepts. Medieval religious consciousness differed fundamentally from modern belief structures while remaining sophisticated and internally coherent. Faith constituted not optional personal choice, but fundamental reality framework organizing all experience. Religious understanding provided comprehensive explanatory system addressing everything from cosmic origins to daily weather patterns to individual illness, functions now distributed across scientific disciplines, secular philosophies, and personal spirituality. This integration created different psychological relationship with religious concepts than modern compartmentalized faith often maintains separately from scientific or practical understanding. As Eleanor moves through morning activities, her emotional experiences reveal both familiar human continuities and distinctive medieval patterns. She feels anticipatory anxiety about Thomas's upcoming business journey. Universal human concern for loved one's safety presented through period-specific concerns about road conditions, potential banditry, and weather uncertainties that create different anxiety content than modern travel worries. She experiences momentary irritation when a servant misunderstands instructions, recognizable human frustration expressed through status-conscious self-regulation appropriate to her position, rather than modern emotional authenticity ideals. These emotional patterns suggest medieval psychological balance different from modern therapeutic ideals. Eleanor neither suppresses emotions entirely nor expresses them freely according to individual preference. Instead, she modulates emotional display according to social position, relationship contexts, and practical circumstances, following cultural scripts regarding appropriate feelings and their proper expression that differ from contemporary psychological emphasis on emotional authenticity or therapeutic processing. Eleanor's midday prayer observance reveals medieval time perception's distinctive rhythm. Unlike modern continuous linear time measurement, medieval experience alternated between ordinary chronological awareness and periodic alignment with sacred time frames during liturgical observances. When reciting prayers associated with Christ's crucifixion during midday devotions, Eleanor temporarily enters remembrance that collapses historical distance, experiencing not mere commemoration but partial participation in sacred events existing simultaneously within eternal divine perspective alongside temporal human experience. This complex temporal consciousness permitted medieval people to experience biblical events as both historically distant and immediately present, creating psychological relationship with religious narratives different from modern historical or symbolic understanding. For Eleanor, Christ's passion represents not past event or abstract theological concept, but cyclically accessible reality, partially experienced through liturgical participation that temporarily transcends ordinary temporal limitations. Consider how this distinctive religious consciousness would shape fundamental identity formation differently than modern secular or religiously pluralistic environments. Eleanor understands herself primarily as Christian soul, temporarily inhabiting physical body, while progressing through earthly journey toward eternal destination. Identity framework prioritizing spiritual status above social position, personal characteristics, or individual achievements. This vertical orientation toward divine judgment and salvation creates different self-understanding than modern horizontal comparison with contemporary others or personal development narratives focused on worldly fulfillment. Afternoon brings social interaction, revealing medieval emotional communities structured differently than modern individualistic psychological models suggest. When a neighboring merchant's wife visits, sharing concerns about her daughter's potential marriage arrangement, Eleanor's supportive response demonstrates emotional practices emphasizing practical problem solving and spiritual perspective rather than validation of feelings for their own sake. She suggests concrete approaches to improve negotiation outcomes, offers perspective about balancing parental wisdom with daughter's legitimate concerns, and recommends specific prayers and saints' intercessions for difficult decisions. This interaction reveals medieval emotional support operating through shared practical wisdom, reinforcement of community values, and spiritual resources, rather than exploration of unique individual feelings or personal authenticity concepts. The conversation builds connection through affirming mutual understanding of life challenges within accepted frameworks, rather than through disclosure of idiosyncratic emotional experiences or personal growth narratives characteristic of modern supportive relationships. As evening approaches, Eleanor experiences appreciation for household beauty, created through modest resources and practical objects, rather than purely decorative elements. The pewter plates arranged on the cupboard catch late afternoon light, their subtle luster representing both practical dining implements and household aesthetic. Hand-woven textiles combining functional warmth with careful color patterns provide visual pleasure alongside physical comfort. These integrated practical aesthetic experiences typify medieval beauty perception, finding visual satisfaction within necessary objects rather than separating decorative elements from functional items. Medieval emotional vocabulary differed significantly from modern psychological terminology while enabling sophisticated emotional communication, where contemporary language emphasizes interior feelings as primary with external expressions as secondary manifestations. Medieval understanding often reversed this relationship, viewing standardized emotional displays as constituting the emotion rather than merely expressing internal states. This framework created a different relationship between inner experience and outward manifestation than modern assumptions about authentic emotions existing independently from their expression. Conventional emotional performances, appropriate grief at funerals, proper joy at weddings, expected anger at injustice, represented not insincere displays, but proper participation in communal emotional standards that partially constituted, rather than merely expressed, the feelings themselves. Evening prayers with her children reveal intergenerational transmission of religious identity through embodied practices rather than abstract belief statements. Eleanor guides them through physical devotional gestures, proper kneeling posture, formal hand positions for prayer, appropriate bowing at sacred names, alongside memorized prayer texts. This multisensory religious pedagogy develops spiritual identity through bodily habits and memorized language patterns, in addition to conceptual understanding, creating religious subjects through practice rather than primarily through intellectual assent to propositional beliefs. Before retiring, Eleanor engages in examination of conscience, reviewing the day's actions against moral and spiritual standards in preparation for eventual confession. This practice reveals medieval psychological self-regulation through anticipated external accountability rather than primarily through internalized moral autonomy. Eleanor evaluates her behavior considering how it appears before divine judgment, imagining future accounting to her confessor, and assessing spiritual consequences rather than consulting personal ethical principles or individual conscience concepts that would emerge more prominently in later periods. As Eleanor prepares for sleep, her final prayers reflect medieval relationship with mortality, fundamentally different from modern death avoidance or medical perspective. She includes standard petitions for protection during night hours when death might come during sleep, demonstrating matter-of-fact acceptance of mortality as constant possibility rather than distant future event. This prayer practice reveals death integrated within ordinary consciousness rather than psychologically separated from daily awareness, creating different psychological relationship with human finitude than modern compartmentalized mortality awareness, typically restricted to specific circumstances or crisis moments. And so we leave Eleanor to her rest, having glimpsed through our historical journey both the material conditions of her medieval existence and something of her inner experience shaped by cultural frameworks distinct from our own, yet containing recognizable human constants. Her life, constrained by material limitations, gender expectations, and technological boundaries we have largely transcended, nonetheless contained rich meaning, genuine agency within available parameters, and sophisticated understanding of her world through conceptual frameworks different from but not inferior to our own. As you drift towards sleep, perhaps carry with you appreciation for how human experience continuously balances universal constants of emotion, need, and aspiration with culturally specific frameworks that shape how these constants manifest across historical periods. Behind the stereotypical images of distant, alien medieval people lived individuals with recognizable dreams, fears, loves, and ambitions. Their humanity, a connecting thread across centuries of historical change, despite the genuine differences in worldview that remind us of human adaptability and cultural creativity. I hope this extended historical sleep journey has brought you both peaceful relaxation and deeper understanding of our medieval ancestors' lived experiences. This channel aims to transport you across time while guiding you toward restful sleep, bridging education and relaxation in ways that honor both intellectual curiosity and physical need for rest. Thank you for joining me on this journey through medieval life. Sleep well, dear listener, and perhaps dream of cobblestone streets, candlelit halls, and the distant tolling of church bells across a medieval town at dusk. Until our next historical sleep journey, may your rest be deep and your dreams be sweet. Good night. Conclusion. As the final guests depart with appropriate expressions of gratitude and reciprocal hospitality invitations, Eleanor experiences the complex emotional aftermath familiar to hosts across historical periods. Satisfaction at successful social performance alongside physical exhaustion from sustained attention to multiple responsibilities. The quality of conversations, guests' evident enjoyment, and smooth progression of the feast without visible difficulties all confirm her successful management despite Thomas's absence. The household now transitions to post-celebration recovery, servants clearing tables and restoring the hall to normal arrangement, leftover food being appropriately distributed according to medieval custom. Some portions go to servants as customary compensation, supplementing their regular maintenance, while other portions are set aside for charitable distribution to parish poor. Practical resource management interwoven with spiritual obligation and community responsibility. In a quiet moment as activities settle, Eleanor checks again on the ailing apprentice, finding modest improvement that suggests recovery rather than decline. This personal care amid larger responsibilities demonstrates the medieval integration of business and household concerns. Employees considered partially as extended family members, entitled to attention, typically reserved for kin in modern conceptualization. Later that evening, with children and servants settled for the night, Eleanor finally sits alone in the solar with accounts from both feast expenses and recent business transactions. By candlelight, she updates the household and business ledgers Thomas will review upon return, careful records that demonstrate the sophisticated financial management practiced by successful merchant households, despite lacking modern accounting technologies or standardized methods. As she works, Eleanor might reflect on her position within medieval society. The constraints certainly real, yet her agency perhaps greater than simplified historical narratives suggest. As a merchant's wife, she navigates complex territories between prescribed gender limitations and practical authority, between public deference and private influence, between religious ideals of wifely submission and economic realities requiring partnership. Her experience embodies the nuanced reality that medieval women, particularly in urban commercial settings, often exercised significant practical power despite formal restrictions, their contributions essential to family prosperity while remaining partially invisible in official records and public recognition. The Michaelmas feast represents just one coordination point in Eleanor's ongoing management of household, business, and community responsibilities that continue through seasonal cycles of medieval life. Tomorrow will bring resumed trading activities, continued nursing of the apprentice toward recovery, preparations for approaching winter needs, and eventual reintegration of Thomas's authority when negotiations conclude and travel conditions permit his return. This cyclical pattern of celebration and ordinary days, of crisis and resolution, of absence and return, of scarcity and abundance, characterizes the medieval experience of time as both linear progression and circular repetition. Unlike our modern emphasis on constant innovation and forward momentum, medieval temporality balanced change with continuity, finding security in predictable rhythms while adapting to inevitable variations within recognizable patterns. As candlelight flickers across account pages, Eleanor's moment of solitude offers contemplative space rare in the constantly social medieval environment. Perhaps she offers silent prayers of gratitude for successful completion of festival obligations, for the household's relative prosperity amid medieval economic uncertainties, for the community connections reinforced through shared celebration. These private spiritual reflections represent the interior life that historical records rarely capture, but that surely provided medieval women psychological resources for navigating their challenging circumstances. And so we leave Eleanor to her quiet evening tasks. One day in a medieval life comprising thousands, each filled with practical challenges, meaningful relationships, spiritual engagement, and personal agency exercised within the constraints and possibilities of her historical moment. Her experience, neither idealized utopia nor unrelenting hardship, reminds us that people in all eras navigate their circumstances with intelligence, adaptation, and resilience, finding meaning and connection despite difficulties unfamiliar to our modern experience. As you drift towards sleep, perhaps carry with you appreciation for both the genuine hardships medieval people faced and the sophisticated adaptations they developed to create meaning and security within their world. Behind the stereotypical images of a distant alien past lived real people with recognizable hopes, fears, frustrations, and joys, their humanity a connecting thread across centuries of historical change. I hope this historical sleep journey has brought you both peaceful relaxation and deeper understanding of our medieval ancestors' lived experiences. This channel aims to transport you across time while guiding you toward restful sleep, bridging education and relaxation in ways that honor both intellectual curiosity and physical need for rest. Thank you for joining me on this journey through medieval life. Sleep well, dear listener, and perhaps dream of cobblestone streets, candlelit halls, and the distant tolling of church bells across a medieval town at dusk. Until our next historical sleep journey, may your rest be deep and your dreams be sweet. Good night.